Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to the rest of you guys. Today's a special episode. It's Big 5-0. We made it. Episode 50. For those of you that stuck around this whole time, thank you. For those of you that are new to tuning in, welcome to your first ever or early episodes of Bitcoin Magazine Live. Because it's episode 50 and we do things big on big round numbers, there are going to be a lot of sats being thrown in that YouTube chat. Twitch fam, I know you exist. We love you. Populate that YouTube chat and feel free to stick around in there to earn some sats. Hopefully we will be joined later on by our guest today, Shaan Puri. He is currently MIA. If anyone knows where he is, feel free to give him a tap and remind him about this. In the meantime, though, we're going to dive right into the news. And big news out of today is Joe Biden's executive order. I think one thing in particular that is very important to just highlight about this is the fact that nowhere in this executive order is it explicitly said or referenced it being Bitcoin. Digital assets are referenced. The broader crypto market, I believe, was mentioned just as far as crypto. However, we have not yet seen anything in regards to what their stances are. But I'm going to cut myself up because Shaan is now here. We're going to take a quick 2-minute commercial break, and then Shaan and I will chat, and then we'll be joined after Shaan with Chris. And Chris and I will really dive into Biden's executive order as well as Cynthia Loomis's comments. We're going to have some stats in that chat as well. So stick around through that commercial break. And as always, if you have not bought your tickets, use code YTMAG, get 10% off of your Bitcoin 22 conference tickets. Talk to you in a little bit, fam. Welcome back, guys, and thank you for sticking around through that commercial break. I am joined by serial investor, entrepreneur, and host of the My First Million podcast, Shaan Puri. Shaan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, for sure. Glad to be here.
So to kick things off, I'd love for you to share your orange pilling story, how you first learned about Bitcoin, and what were your first initial reactions? Were you skeptical or were you diving headfirst into it?
Yeah, this might have been 2013. There was a guy in our office named Pete who was our sysadmin. And, Pete was the kind of guy who, if you ever walked by his computer, he was just hanging out in IRC channels with other sysadmins from other companies. He was like he's like an internet OG. And so he brought it up at lunch one day. We were all having lunch and he's like, Bitcoin, guys. Yeah, I'm mining. He's like, I'm mining it on our server. And he was like, I think it had just gone to like $7 or something. It was like one of the first spikes. It was $7, $15, something like that. Some noticeable like uptick. And he was saying, it's great because, and he started explaining it. Right? He's like, it's great because it's like money that is not created by the government. And, he was explaining how, um, he's like, it's cool because you could just mine it on your computer. So it was like, definitely he's in that group of like, Bitcoin went through these adoption phases. It went through kind of like the crypto anarchist, then the like hardcore engineer, and then the like, the financial, the person who understands how the finance, the world of finance works. So that was the first time I'd heard about it. Then a couple months later, a debate breaks out between him and our CTO, this guy Paul Whitten, and Paul was saying, and not even a debate, they were both agreeing, but Paul liked it for different reasons. Paul was saying, "Oh, this is great because fiat money is blah blah blah," and I had never heard the word fiat before. I didn't even understand what fiat money was, and he was like, he was explaining it to me, and he was explaining all the perils of fiat money and how governments could just print money and sort of devalue the currency. And I was like, yeah, but they don't really do that. He goes, look at this. Like Japan just announced that they're going to double their money supply over the next, I forgot, X years, 5 years, 10 years, something like that. And I was like, that's weird. I never really thought about that. I never heard about that. And he started explaining how in other countries that I had never lived in, um, how big of a problem this was. So, what's going on in Argentina, what's going on in Greece, et cetera. So I started to hear more about it, and but I was sort of the guy like, hey guys, let's focus on the real business at hand here, right? Like, ironically, I'm trying to tell everybody, guys, let's stay focused on the moneymaker. When actually, the greatest investment in the history of technology was sitting right in front of me at $7, and I was saying, no, put that away, put the toys away. Let's do the real thing. That was a big lesson learned. So fast forward like a year, 2014 sometime, Bitcoin kind of now is over $100, and I start to get more curious about it. I make my first purchase. We plan to launch a business in the space because I was like, wow, buying Bitcoin is pretty hard. And so our engineers start rallying. They're like, yeah, we need to make, okay, maybe not an exchange, but how about all the other financial products? So money market funds, lending, borrowing, there's other things that people are going to want to do with this that you can't do today. And we start, making prototypes. And then our investor, our like chief, like kind of legal counsel, just gives our investor the heads up, says, hey, just so you know, the guys are really like scrambling around this Bitcoin idea. I don't know what this is, but I Googled Bitcoin and it's talking about buying drugs and stuff like that. So you may just want to talk to them. So I get a call from the investor. He comes over and he says, hey, I heard you guys are doing a Bitcoin project. And I said, yeah, we're thinking about this. And he said, I don't know if that's a good idea. Like, there's a lot of liability with that sort of thing. Have you thought through A, B, C, and D? And I was like, no, I haven't thought through any of that, to be honest with you. and and so I was just too early in my I was not high conviction enough to say no. Here's why this actually does make a lot of sense. And B, because I wasn't high conviction enough, I was doing just kind of the fun bits, but not really digging into the compliance and legal side. So we ended up killing the project. And so at that point, I became somebody who just held a little bit of Bitcoin and followed the project, but was very close to a much bigger play there, where we're either buying more or even building one of the very early, kind of like exchanges, or what you see today with FTX and Kraken and Coinbase. You see everyone's carved out a different space. When I look back, we had the team and the talent to do that, and some people had the desire, but we didn't have the cohesive story. So that's my coulda, woulda, shoulda story.
I mean, my favorite takeaway from that, and I am genuinely curious about this. You mentioned the very first person at your company who was talking about Bitcoin was mining it at your own servers. Did you guys even, were you like aware of that? The energy cost of that, of course, putting your electricity bill a little bit higher than I think you would typically expect, or did that just sort of blissfully unaware of that at those early days?
Yeah, we were sort of, I mean, it just sounded like a fun thing to do. It didn't seem like it was going to break the bank. The servers are running anyways, so I don't know if there was any extra cost. I truly don't actually know. I don't know if there's any extra cost or if he was just using some of the excess capacity that of what was already running. And I also don't know what happened to it. So maybe I hope he got to keep it, right? Like he deserved to keep it. That really wasn't company Bitcoin. That was Pete Bitcoin, and I hope Pete has it to this day. I don't want to ask any questions.
Fair enough, Pete. If you're out there, we hope you've held those bitcoins all these years later, man. Um, you've made mention of a few different exchanges. What is sort of the place in Bitcoin right now that excites you the most? Exchanges are being put on a spotlight on a global stage currently, given everything going on geopolitically.
Yep.
But I'm curious if that is where you are paying the most attention to as far as Bitcoin company development, or if there's something else that's really exciting you.
Yeah, I think that it's like it's a moment in time here. So, this is the stress test in multiple ways. So there's test number one. Test one is, so do people really want, a self-sovereign currency? Do people really want a currency that's not owned by the nation state, right? Like if you ever believed that should exist, it would happen when one country is sanctioning another country and the dollar is getting devalued by like massive money printing, and people are fleeing their country and can't take their physical possessions, and they need to carry their wealth with them, right? Like this is the story of why, like, the extreme scenario of why you like Bitcoin is like playing out in parts of the world right now. And so the question to me is like, does it work? Right? Like the scenario came up now, like, does the fire extinguisher work? There's a fire in the house. And so that's, the first thing I did was I went and checked is Bitcoin volume spiking in Russia and in Ukraine, and go check on local Bitcoins. And to be honest, my first pass, and this was like, day one of the crisis, so maybe it's changed since then, but my first pass look was, no, it hadn't spiked. There was not a huge surge in demand um, on a citizen level for crypto in those countries. And you would expect that, right? Like you would expect in Russia, if the ruble drops 40%, that people are going to start to wonder, wait, should I keep my wealth in the ruble, or should I get it into some other asset class? And the fastest asset class that is, it's gold 2.0. It is a store of wealth. Should be Bitcoin. And so I just haven't seen that. Have you guys seen that? Is there data that supports now that's like, do we see surges?
So actually, it was that first day was the only really where we didn't see that surge. And since then, there's been an astronomical rise in accounts in both Ukraine and in Russia. And since then, we've actually had regulators all over the world sort of coming after, not with actual legislation, but more requests of,
Exchanges, yeah.
yeah, essentially saying, please shut down these accounts. Coinbase actually very loudly
Yeah.
flipped the script. They said on Friday of last week, no, we're not going to do that. And then on Monday, they shut down 25,000 accounts. It's a,
Yeah,
it's a,
which is another stress test, right? That's stress test two. So stress
absolutely.
test two is, do you stand for what you stand for, right? Like, so do you preach, censorship resistance only when it's the side you agree with, or do you fundamentally say, no, this is a freedom, this is a right, and you have the right to transact, and let people have the right to transact. Now, I get for these companies, if they're put under tremendous pressure and they really have to, they may want to do one thing and be put under severe pressure to say, if you don't comply, then we're going to consider you, sort of an enemy of the state. And in a way, I understand why they may do something against their will, but that's stress test too. Who's going to stand up to it? Who's not? And then does the water find a new way to flow? Or are we dependent on these centralized exchanges, right? So that's why I looked at local Bitcoins and other ways. How would people get this thing, even if the centralized exchanges are, I'm worried that they're going to pass my information to the Russian government or to whatever, to the Ukrainian government, or that my account could get frozen. So I actually just want to self custody and buy it, off of a central exchange. So I think that's the second stress test, which is, does this really hold up as a I like to say, giving people the right to transact. So it's supposed to give people that freedom. Does it really do it, or does it fall short? And if it falls short, that doesn't mean it's fall short forever. It means, interesting, like we're not there yet. And this might create the demand for a player or a service that will stand up for that right, whenever. And so, even if I disagree, and I wrote this in the Milk Road, right? I write this email every morning for about what's going on in crypto, and it's called Milk Road. You can go get it at milkroad.com. But I wrote in there, I said, oh man, this feels kind of funny. Like, I love it when crypto stands up for the little guy, for the oppressed person, for the person who's been cut off from the banking system and they're bankless, they're unbanked. But then what happens when it's, a dictator who's trying to fund war? Do I still stand by my feeling that everybody has the fundamental right to transact, and that should not be stripped away from them? And so, that creates an uncomfortable question. And so, yeah, I do feel like it's a right to transact. I do feel like this is a neutral technology, should be allowed. So that's my personal beliefs. But I think, again, it's being tested by a new scenario. And I got a question for you on that spike. Where do I go to see that spike? Where are you seeing that spike? Because I remember checking day one, it wasn't there, like you said. And so where should somebody go if they want to observe this playing out in real time, that actually, yes, this is being picked as a solution to a problem that's emerging?
I'm trying to pull up right now the source that we used when we sent the tweet out last week when this came out.
But I can just go to your Twitter feed, the Bitcoin Magazine Twitter feed.
Yeah, the Bitcoin Magazine Twitter feed was the one announcing it, and there was a source posted under that. Because for whatever reason now citing your sources on Twitter has become a mainstream cause of concern. But there's something that you said that I fundamentally agree with, which was, this is a stress test on how much you actually believe in the product, or in this instance, in Bitcoin sort of core values. And the value being, this is a decentralized system. We've created these centralized points of stress where you have an exchange that, hey, a government can come after this company, an attack or a ransomware attack can go after this company's sort of security breaches or whatever. I'm just using big words at this point, but
Right.
In essence, it is this test of, do you stand for what you believe in? Do you actually believe in what Bitcoin can do? Or do you just want to make a bunch of money and like appease who you need to appease? There is this sort of straddling game too being played though, because at the same time, while I myself think all government regulations at this point are just overreaching, there's this degree of, we still need to play the game. We need to dance with them a little bit. We need to be invited into their circle so that we could hopefully, and this is probably a really bad word or bad phrase to say with two brown men on a camera, but blow up the entire system and start it over new.
Hey, you said that. I didn't say that.
I did.
So
I've been garnering a lot of
strategy here, right? There's a game theory element to this. So
absolutely.
Today, who has sort of more power? Is it the president, or is it somebody who leads a social network? So I think in truth, the president has more power because they have the sort of the army, right? They have the guns. But the fact that that's even a question, 10 years ago or 15 years ago would have sounded ridiculous, right? When Mark Zuckerberg is on a couch at Harvard campus and it's this silly social network for relationship statuses, right? And so social networks seemed like initially a sort of a fad, a toy, and then like kind of this utility, and then all of a sudden, oh, it's too powerful. And by the time it's too powerful, now it gets to set the rules for how things work, right? The social network banned the president from speaking on the platform, not the other way around. And so, even if the United States tried to ban Facebook, Facebook would say, great, I have, it wouldn't say great, but it would say, you can't stop me. I have 1 billion users outside of the United States. I'm going to continue to operate. You can't sort of shut it down. And so similarly with crypto, I think there's a game theory element to this, which is that the smartest thing we can do is get as entrenched as possible with the enemies, right? With the incumbents. So it's like, you want to invite some level of regulation, which both brings comfort to the average person, but also brings comfort to the government. You don't want to be at war with these parties, even though fundamentally you're basically challenging the government's ability to have a monopoly on the money supply. Right? The government today has a monopoly on money, and crypto breaks that monopoly on money. But you don't want to be so combative with the government, nor do you want to be combative with, let's say, big finance. Right? Like the more heavy hitters from finance that we see come into this space, whether it's Ray Dalio or Stanley Druckenmiller or, Paul Tudor Jones or whoever else, they add legitimacy, they add credibility, they add big balance sheets that are holding this stuff. And then if regulation comes down that's not so supportive or is a heavy taxation, guess what? These guys get to fight. These guys are people you want on your side to push back against that. And so you first want them close, and then be able to, you know, set your own rules, once you're in that position of power in a way, right? You actually have leverage in that situation. And so I think that people who kind of want to just have disobedience from government and push away big finance, like I don't think that's the right solution. I think the better solution is to be, let whoever believes believe, let whoever buys in buy in, embrace them as a believer, don't make fun of them, and with governments, it's better to work together, especially today, and comply more so than push back. Um, but the thing you said earlier is true. Every company knows this. It's really easy to have values when they're not tested, right? It's easy to say we believe in whatever, inclusion or diversity or whatever. Okay, test it. You're hiring for this role. Are you hiring a diverse person or not? Right? Are you, what are you doing here? Did you interview, the right people or not? And so, Facebook famously had values that actually resonated with the tech community because they acknowledged the trade-off. Facebook's values early on were move fast and break things, because they acknowledge you don't get to move fast with no cost. If you move fast, you're sometimes going to break things, and we're acknowledging that is the stress that comes with moving fast. So similarly, you can't have a belief that this is uncensorable, the right to transact, the freedom to transact. This is banking the unbanked. And then turn around and immediately, censor everybody. So, your values get tested, and that's when you understand how strongly you uphold them or not.
Absolutely, man. It's a very interesting time, and we're watching Bitcoin be put on this world stage, and how I think we in the community approach this, both from the business lens as well as like helping to teach people who need this, who want to get involved in this, who have no choice at this point, whether it's because your country is going through terrible inflation, whether your everything you own is being locked away somewhere, or you're being told you can only withdraw $3,000 of your money in your local currency. I am kind of curious your thoughts on what impact. I mean, today, I don't know if you saw, there was an executive order by Joe Biden that was released. We've heard Putin for a few weeks now before the Ukraine invasion talking about how, actually we have such a competitive advantage given our massive oil and gas and energy source, that we should be a world leader in Bitcoin. And now there's conversations out of Russia to potentially legalize Bitcoin. What does that look like? What, in your mind, a scenario where Russia makes the first move towards Bitcoin against all the rest of the Western world?
So walk me through this scenario. So you're saying Russia leans in rather than pushes away. And then you're saying, how does the West react to that?
Yes. And no one in the West has done that. Let's say they just say Bitcoin is legalized. You can buy, sell, transact Bitcoin as you see fit for whatever you want. No one in the West has done it to this point other than El Salvador, but I do not consider them part of that Western bloc.
So Russia makes it legal tender. I think that short-term bad, long-term good for crypto. Short-term bad because I think you're sort of getting into it's like if whatever, it's like if Pablo Escobar all of a sudden says I love Bitcoin, right? It's gonna create a situation where you say, oh, I guess it's associated with potentially things that I don't want to be associated with, so we should stay away. Like the optics would then lead the U.S. government to also to not lean in that same way. So I think that short term it would be bad. Long term it ends up being good because I sort of just believe crypto is inevitable, and the dominoes will fall in a certain order, and there's just like different paths it will take, but it is inevitable. And so, so I actually think the more interesting thing is if is which country is going to start to store, significant portions of its wealth in crypto, because there's sort of this, like, again, a game theory mechanic, which is that if nations begin to put their wealth into Bitcoin or into various cryptocurrencies, it's going to it's going to increase the value of that cryptocurrency. So there's sort of a self-fulfilling aspect to it, where if I don't really have, if I'm India, if I'm not the reserve currency, I have no chance to be the reserve currency. If I what am I going to do with my wealth? How do I, what is my angel investment? What is my investment that can 100x over the next 100 years? Well, I kind of can. There's a certain tipping point where if enough countries, if enough legit countries adopt this as part of their, their nation's wealth strategy, then it's sort of self-fulfilling. It will become a de facto thing. It will cross the chasm in a bigger way. And because you bet first, you sort of got to pump your own bags. And so what's interesting to me is going to be which countries do that. So, okay, El Salvador started to do it. Fantastic. But, El Salvador is sort of this like, small, okay, that's just like this oddball thing. It's the micro strategy of countries. It's like, oh, I never really thought about El Salvador before, but now it's like Bitcoin. Okay, so you've got one notable thing for me to talk about, at the world stage, in the same way that I don't think anybody knew or cared about MicroStrategy stock until he started putting the whole balance sheet into Bitcoin. But then what happens when Tesla does it and Square does it and whoever else, right? That's what we need to see is the next country that does it. Will it be, will it be the Netherlands? Will it be Germany? Well, who's going to do it? And it doesn't really matter who goes first. I think it would be not so great if Russia was first, but once that happens, I think we're going to see a sort of a dramatic increase in legitimacy, credibility, and stickiness, where again, further and further entrenched into the world's financial system. You can't get out once you're entrenched in that way.
No, absolutely. And I'm going to take a quick moment to remind those who are listening and those who are watching. Last year, when it was announced that El Salvador was going to attempt and introduce a bill to make Bitcoin legal tender, this announcement happened at Bitcoin 21. And this year, Nayib Bukele, the president of El Salvador, will be there himself in Miami, April 6th through the 9th. And he has a special announcement. And there is a rumor. I am not confirming this. I am not saying this is actually going to happen. But the rumor mill that has turned is that he is going to help announce the second country that is going to introduce this as legal tender on the short list. I mean, he did meet with the president of Turkey earlier this year, I believe, or the end of last year. And they just announced over 50% inflation. There's rumors about another Central American country or potentially a country out of South America. I'm with you, Shaan. If it's Russia, it sets us back, I think. But in the long term, absolutely. All press is good press. All press is good press. I'm a firm and adamant believer of this. I, however, also adhere to this idea that for the time being, those countries that have been left out of the US dollar dominance and the US just system that's been in place now since Bretton Woods and even more so over the last 50 years, they're more incentivized to find alternative stores of value, whether it's gold, whether it's different currencies, or whether it's Bitcoin. My homeland of Iran, I know, has been adamant on trying to figure out ways to combat their inflation. They've dealt with over 100% inflation now in 2 years' time. It remains to be seen. I think the next few months are going to be very interesting. It's going to be a crazy, scary time. But most importantly, I think the access to money, regardless of who you are, what you believe, if you've worked for your money, you have the right to access it. And that's just my own personal belief. And I know that so many people in Bitcoin believe that as well. And from what your line of dialogue has been with us right now, I don't think that you believe any differently than that.
Yeah, I think there's a different. I think there's sanctions where it's like I refuse to trade with you. I think that is a completely fair thing to do. I refuse to trade with you. There's a difference between that and I will sort of freeze and confiscate your wealth, and I think it's a tricky situation because if you agree in one case, then you agree that it's possible, and that who gets to decide who does that? Well, the guy with the biggest guns, and so just fundamentally, it's not a road you really want to go down. So yeah, I'm personally that's my philosophy on it, but I got to admit I don't spend a ton of time thinking about this, right? Because it's such a extreme outlier scenario, which is why I called it a stress test. It's not a scenario that I think is relevant to my life, the fundamental right to transact. Like I don't use cryptocurrency because I'm afraid that the government is going to freeze my accounts or seize my money, right? Like that is not my fear. Like that would be such a low probability event that it wouldn't be worth my time and energy to like create a hedge for that. Like I have much bigger risks than that in my personal life. But I believed in it for other reasons, right? Like I believe in having programmable money. I believe in having a digital currency that is not inflating. So like I just think that there's other reasons to believe, and this has always been the kind of most extreme, like 0 day, scenario. And let's see how it holds up.
Yeah, I mean, look, these stress tests that you mentioned, these are people's wildest nightmares that they never thought would come to fruition. And unfortunately, like pretty much since 2020, like everything is on the table, man. It kind of feels that way. You've mentioned a couple of times now, and I'd be remiss if I don't take a moment to ask you. I know you invest in things beyond Bitcoin, both in the crypto space at large and as well as other things. But I'd like to just have you define what is the difference in your mind between Bitcoin and crypto in general.
Yeah, I think early on this was less clear. Early on, it looked like the thinking has changed, right? Like, early on it looked like this is going to be used for payments. And actually the like sort of product market fit that is found at the moment is in the store of value use case, and maybe later will be used for medium of exchange once the store of value is established. Um, so initially it looked like maybe Bitcoin's for payments, and there's going to be one, and it just seemed like, well, you just bet on the biggest brand, the biggest network effect. But then it became clear that, like, oh, actually each of these networks has like a different property, in the same way that you have like Facebook, which is for your friends and family, and then you get LinkedIn, which is for your professional contacts, or you'll get Airbnb, which is a network of places to stay, right? Like these weren't all the same thing. They were all different networks. And so what's intriguing to me about the other networks like Ethereum, I'm very, very bullish on Ethereum, is the programmable nature of money, right? So it's if you have one place that is really, to me, Bitcoin is a savings technology. It is a way to save and preserve your wealth. People think you buy Bitcoin to make money. No, you actually buy Bitcoin to save money. And that is the thing that I think most people don't get. Yes, today, because very few, only a small number of people today use it to save money, that today, if you buy into the network, you'll end up making money. But over time, the real value, I think, of Bitcoin is going to be wealth preservation. And I think the value of things like Ethereum is going to be the ability to build, to program money, to smart contracts, basically. So a way to do things with money, move money around programmatically in a way that you can't really do with sort of traditional currencies. So that's really interesting. And then you see stuff where you're like, okay, well, is that also going to be the best chain for gaming? Like, no, maybe there's going to be a game for a chain for gaming, and and so you start to go down the list and you realize, oh wow, actually these different use cases have different needs, right? Like people were making fun of BitClout or DeSo for a bunch of reasons. Some people were skeptical about it, but I think fundamentally they did identify a correct need, which is if we're going to have social networking that's not controlled, that's a protocol instead of a company. That protocol needs to be able to share, store and share and display like photos and videos. And that's not what Bitcoin is good at. That's not what Ethereum is good at. And so putting media into a chain is going to require like a specific purpose-built media chain, it seems like. And so, that's how I think about these other coins. I think about the other inevitabilities. So whether they're, whether it's DeFi or DAOs or social tokens or, social protocols, or whatever it may be, they're going to need a chain that supports their use case, and that's where you see other tokens and other projects thrive, right? Like if we're going to need to have file storage, then Filecoin might make sense. If we're going to need to build games, then we're going to need maybe to use a different chain like Ronin, or different chains that are optimized for that use case. So it makes sense to acquire those digital assets and own a piece of those protocols.
I don't hate what you're saying. I've admitted on this show, despite my bosses and my peers' better judgment, that yes, I am also a big believer in ETH as well. I think it gets a little cloudy and murky when you go down a lot of the other rabbit holes. But I do think that beyond just Bitcoin, there is a lot of use cases for money and transactions that other types of technology, blockchain technology, and beyond will be helpful and useful when we fully cement ourselves in a digital age. Not dissimilar to the way you kind of explained your exposure and entry into Bitcoin. I myself, very early on, bought some, but like didn't really dive down any rabbit holes. I had a career in Hollywood that I was more focused on than really trying to make money. For myself, it was when I took the time to define what money is And you hinted a little bit, a store of value, a medium of exchange, but what are the properties of money that you look and see something like Bitcoin having, and then something like Ethereum, which you say you're a fan of? What are the
Right.
properties of Ethereum versus Bitcoin that you think are better?
So I actually don't think of Ethereum so much as money, but
Okay.
let's first talk about money. So to me, my mental model for money has always been it is like a frozen unit of time. So you basically do labor. You create some value through your labor, and you're rewarded with a frozen block of time, and you get to keep that in your freezer. And then whenever you want somebody else to do some labor for you, whether it's at a restaurant, hey, please cook me this dish, or you're buying this house, hey, please, I'll pay you for having built this house and claim this land. You basically thaw out that money, that frozen money, give it to them. They freeze it, they put it in their freezer, and so it's just a way to barter time, time and energy. And so that's what money fundamentally is to me. And that's why people who say I want financial freedom, they want to. What do you want to do? I want to be able to do what I want with my I want to be able to do what I want with my time, get my time back, right? Like it's why people care about that, and why they've sort of settled at that, which is like, okay, what's the purpose of all this money? Is like, okay, well, why do I buy a private jet? Like, yeah, sure, there's a sort of like I want to flex on people, but like the other reason is it saves me a bunch of time, and even flexing on people saves me time. How do I convince you that I'm high status and that you should, do business with me? Well, it saves me a bunch of time to be able to do that because I can just acquire this thing that symbolizes that. And so that's what money is. Um, and so that's why it's really important to have a store of value, because you don't want to put your frozen time in a kind of a hot pantry. It's just going to melt. And so Bitcoin is like the best freezer, right? It's like you put it here, and 100 years later it should have no loss, right? Like it should still be, let's say, one of 21 million coins that exists. And there should be no sort of like loss or devaluation of that currency. And so that's to me like the Bitcoin use case. The Ethereum use case is different. Really, it's like a programming product, right? So it's a smart contract product, which is to say, cool, we need to be able to exchange value in some predetermined ways. And how do we do that without, tons of humans in the middle, right? So like everywhere where there's a middleman, everywhere where there's a gatekeeper or a lawyer, can we replace that with code? And if we can replace that with code, then we sort of simplify, the financial system, and we make it sort of programmable, and it just runs in the cloud. So that's why you see things like DeFi taking off, because what is finance but a set of contracts that are orchestrated amongst a set of people that don't trust each other. And so basically what Ethereum allows you to do is to build programs or smart contracts that basically say you can now transact in these more interesting ways using this native currency. Ethereum might become money just because it is so useful. It might be so damn useful as a way to move money around, as a way to move value around, that we just sort of skip to just holding it for because because we need it to move value all the time, so we end up holding it. So that in that sense, it becomes a unit of value along the way. So that's to me the difference between the two. One is around preservation; it's around making sure that your money doesn't melt, and then the other one is about moving that value around more frictionlessly and being able to like get more out of that currency, because you can use it in more ways, more interesting ways with less friction.
My cause for concern in what you're saying is, and this is just a present day issue, it could very well get solved. We've seen Vitalik and other ETH developers try to solve this, but the fees to transact your Ethereum are so much higher than if I want to send Bitcoin over the Lightning Network. It's almost seeming like it's beneficial to just focus on Bitcoin in both capacities for the time being until ETH figures it out. What are your thoughts on just the fees and whatnot? Because just to transact that money, if you're paying a 10% premium on it, like that's worse than a Visa credit card.
Right. Yeah, we've seen this many times with innovation, which is innovation starts out very expensive. The first computers were extremely expensive. The first cell phones were extremely expensive. The first, electric cars were extremely expensive. This is fairly common, which is that until you figure out how to scale production of something, it's going to cost a bunch, and only, whales who are less price sensitive are going to be able to use it. And they're going to want to use it because it's cool and new and it's interesting, and it solves some problem for them, or it gives them some benefits that they're not getting elsewhere. So like, to me, the bull case for Ethereum is, oh my God, look how much usage you have, even despite the fees, right? Like the fees should be an absolute non-starter. The fact that people are still using it shows you how much damn value is in this thing. And like, imagine having such huge fees and people are still doing it. You must assume that, wow, they must really want that thing. They must really want that thing if they're willing to pay this fee. And then the question is, well, is this fee, a fundamental problem of this network, or is there, is there a mechanism, is there a plan to reduce those fees over time? And I think what you've seen is that, like, yes, there's 5 other protocols that say we're faster and cheaper than Ethereum, so you can use us today with certain trade-offs to security and decentralization. And then you see Ethereum say, well, like, the only thing we care about doing is, like, scaling Ethereum. And we've been doing that for 5 years, and we'll do it again for the next 10 years. And like, that's all we're going to do. And so do I believe that these geniuses, are going to be able to figure it out? Yeah, like I do. I do believe that, because over time, that's what happens in technology. Like, technology over time gets faster, cheaper, and smaller. And so I don't think that there's any reason why Ethereum or blockchain technology is not going to be any different. That it's not going to get faster, cheaper, and more lightweight over time. So I don't really worry about that. In fact, like I said, to me, it's a signal of how damn useful it must be that we're doing this, that we're still using these products, right? Like, I paid, probably, like, the other day, I moved money onto the Terra network and I put it into Anchor Protocol, and I started getting 19%, savings on my, in my savings account, basically, right? Well, why do I do that? Well, because if I leave that money in, Bank of America, I'm going to get my 0.001%. And yeah, I have low fees, but I have low value. So, what would I trade that? Well, if I move, hundreds of thousands of dollars into a protocol that's paying me 19% a year, and moving that money costs me $100 or $150 in fees along the way, well, it's worth it, right? So like, I lived through the shitty UX, and I went through the confusion and watched tutorials. So I spent time, I spent energy, I spent stress worrying about, wow, I clicked the button, I click send, and I don't see it in my other wallet. Oh, I hope I didn't just lose all my money, right? I take smart contract risk. I do all these risks because the value is on the other side. And, the equation is very simple. People would not be doing this if there wasn't a bunch of value on the other side. Some people question, is this sustainable value or is this temporary value? Well, we'll see, right? Like, we'll see how that plays out. But for now, I don't think that the fees are really, I think the fees are a bullish sign, not a bearish sign.
I want to hate everything you said. Like, I want to, but logically speaking, it is a sound argument. I will stand by what I said last week, and I will repeat it so you can hear. Vitalik Buterin has invented a lot of things, but there's one thing in particular that he founded that's truly remarkable, that is going to change the world, and that is Bitcoin Magazine. So thank you, Vitalik, for actually starting Bitcoin Magazine and selling it over to the Bitcoiners.
Yeah, totally.
Our chat is absolutely ripping us apart. Me in particular, for letting this conversation go full blown into ETH, and I apologize to the diehard Bitcoiners, but this is exactly what we are talking about.
I wish I could see the chat. Where do I go see the chat?
It's on our YouTube channel right now.
Okay, good. Right,
we are not ETH shilling, so stop labeling it as such. We are having an intelligent,
see if I'm getting ripped.
We are having an intelligent and lively conversation about the use cases of both.
It's one of the sort of like the maxi argument, I think, is one of the things that is the most embarrassing part of it. So I think it is great to believe what you believe and bet what you want to bet, and you can believe that one thing is dramatically better than others, and that there are stupid things that exist. There are stupid coins that are useless. That's all true, but there's just kind of a tell, right? Like, I'm a poker player, and there's kind of a tell. It's like, if you're so worried that somebody's going to mention a competitor or another chain or another token. And by the way, most people who own Ethereum own Bitcoin too. And they appreciate both. And they almost all started as Bitcoin maxis, including Vitalik himself. So I think that, like, it's one of those things where, when you're told you can't talk about something, it's sort of a signal that thing's probably actually true, that there's some truth to that, and that truth hurts. And so, it's sort of a tell when somebody is so, sensitive about another coin being mentioned as legitimate or credible or useful, that there's sort of an insecurity about their own favorite coin in a way, right? And so I think, and I'm not saying that's what's going on in the chat. Maybe the chat just says, "Hey, I'm here for Bitcoin. That's called Bitcoin Magazine. Let's only talk about Bitcoin." All right, that's fair. But like, the general maximalism that exists is sort of a tell that people are somewhat insecure about their thing, right, about their favorite coin. And so even if I think even if my favorite coin is Ethereum, if a new coin comes out that has some interesting utility and people are excited about it, I don't view that as an attack on Ethereum. I view that as, part of this overall like wave of interesting things going on. And I'll make an independent assessment about it. And I'll never knock anybody for being interested or believing in something else.
You're absolutely right. I mean, look, the Bitcoin community is so loud about being anti-cancel culture, and yet they're the first ones to cancel someone for saying anything about a different token. I'm sorry, but we have reached the mass point of Bitcoin maxis. There might be a few more that trickle in over the years, but the new adopters of Bitcoin are not going to be maxis. They're going to be investors or people who come from different walks of earth and view Bitcoin for a variety of reasons. We joke in this community that Bitcoin fixes this, Bitcoin fixes that, Bitcoin fixes everything. Well, politicians are going to come into Bitcoin because they think it's going to fix politics. Economists are going to come into Bitcoin because they think it's going to fix their economy. Investors are going to come in because they think they can make a quick buck. My taco guy here in Mexico, I've been trying to convince him, like, you need to start accepting Bitcoin because you're just losing the value of your peso that you're collecting overnight. It is going to take a generational shift, but I think this notion of cancel culture within the Bitcoin community just needs to stop. In the same way that we say a lot, hey, there's way too much money, there's way too many eyeballs, and there's just too much going on around Bitcoin for it to ever go to zero. I adamantly believe that. I'm a Buddhist in the sense that like nothing lasts forever, and I respect that law of life. However, for the time being, I think in my lifetime, I have a hard time seeing Bitcoin to go to zero because there's just too many people who don't like to lose money that are in it and have gotten in it at a high price point. And the same can be said about ETH. Like there's just too much money and there's too much investment going on. There's too many side chains and side projects that are built. Like I don't buy or dabble in anything. I think DeFi is in essence like the biggest con of all, in that you're calling something decentralized finance, but there's not a single DeFi token that's decentralized. They all have a singular point. There is an individual or an entity that is building out these sort of chains or these tokens. And as a result, you're calling or sending it as the guise under the guise of, well, this is decentralized finance. Compared to what? Compared to Bitcoin, no, this is as centralized as it can get. Compared to our central finance or central banking system that we have now, yes, okay, this is more decentralized than that. But it's what flavor and what your appetite is. Everyone's different. And in Bitcoin, we accept all. So for those of you in the chat who are grilling people who don't see your perspective or don't see eye to eye to you, I challenge you to take a moment to go read something that you don't agree with without judgment. I challenge you to go watch CNN or Fox, whichever one that you don't align with. Go. Your homework is 30 minutes on that channel today, and you're gonna hate it, but you have to watch it without judgment, because that's the only way we're actually gonna get to hyper Bitcoinization. You're not gonna convince everyone to go onto Bitcoin by telling them they're stupid, you're smarter than them. That's a moronic argument. So that's my 2 cents for those of you in the chat who think that you know better than everyone else on how to push for hyper Bitcoinization.
Yeah, and I don't even think it's a push. I think it's going to be a pull, right? Like I think that very few products can get pushed into anything. Products that get adopted are pulled by the market because there's such huge market demand for what that product does. And so, and that's one of the reasons I believe in something like Bitcoin, is because, like, I mean, Bitcoin is straight out of a movie. Like, it's like, here's this pseudonymous founder that nobody ever knows who it is, and then they make a fortune, tens of billions of dollars, and they never touch it. Right. And then it's like, it's done right after the financial crisis. So it's like somebody who is somebody with a chip on their shoulder, or some group of people with a chip on their shoulder, create this alternative. It's based in math. It can't, 10 years in, never been hacked, never been shut down, never been forked away out of existence, never been outcompeted, never like for this to have happened with no CEO, with no CMO, with no marketing budget, it's on TV all the time, right? Like it's one of the most popular words in the world, and all of that was done, in a completely sort of almost like random way. There was no organized plan, no business plan, no corporate hierarchy that made that possible. I mean, that seems impossible to have happened, and it happened. And so I think that is just like you got to step back and appreciate that this is kind of like a once in a lifetime. If I had described this to you, it would have been like, okay, this is a fantasy, dude. Like, that's not how things work. And so I think that's what's really just remarkable about Bitcoin, and leads me to believe if it survived, the last decade plus of uncertainty and attacks from within, from external, from governments, from companies, from established players like Warren Buffett calling it rat poison, and so on and so forth. The media, so it had reputational attacks, it had technical attacks, it had regulatory attacks, it had every sort of attack you can think of, and it still survived. Like, to me, that's straight out of a movie. And so I think that's one of the most bullish things about Bitcoin in general, is the resiliency and the brand.
No, absolutely. I mean, look, beyond just the resiliency, beyond the fact that they've been able to fight through whatever has been thrown at it in its way. And I will give credit to the maxis, because without the maxis during those low points, during those each cycle crash, during each point where Bitcoin was being attacked by whatever individual, whatever entity, whatever government, the maxis were the ones who helped us get through that. However, there is a new iteration of growth. The value of Bitcoin, the market cap, was the fastest to 1 trillion out of any other type of technology company in the history of the world. That is instrumental. We are below the 1 trillion market cap currently. We will get back there in due time. But it is fascinating to me how quickly we have risen to that point. And it's no longer, in my opinion, about measuring Bitcoin against like the whole argument or discussion of, oh, Bitcoin just flipped Microsoft or Tesla or whatever. I think Microsoft is too much for Bitcoin to even be within a stone's throw at this point. But the point I'm trying to make is we need to start thinking bigger picture. I know it in Bitcoin, we talk a lot about when are we going to surpass gold. We talk a lot, this is digital gold. I'm even looking further than that. When is Bitcoin going to surpass the value of the global stock market? Because that is, I think, at that point, if Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett are still alive, all due respect, I hope you're invested in at that point. But what do you think it takes for, some of these people who are cemented in their anti-Bitcoin ways? You bring up Charlie Munger. I mean, he still is anti-Bitcoin. Bill Gates jokingly said, someone gave me Bitcoin and I immediately got rid of it. I was like, what is this garbage? How do you think people like that get convinced to see what we see in this space?
Hang on one second. My dog's barking. Hold on. I'm going to answer your question. Give me 1 second.
In the meantime, before Shaan gets back, just a reminder, use code YTMAG, get 10% off of your Bitcoin 22 tickets. You're not going to want to miss this. We have speakers such as Jordan Peterson, Nayib Bukele, Jack Mallers, Safety and Moose, Michael Saylor, just to name a few. If you find me at Bitcoin 22, I'll roll us a joint and we'll smoke one together. So long as I'm not working, but you know the drill, guys. You use code YTMAG, and if we sell a ticket live on air, we will make it rain sats. Chris, I think we're going to throw some sats in. It is that hour mark. This is episode 50. Thank you guys who have helped us get here to get to this point. And we'll keep pushing for another 50 to the big 100.
Cool. All right, I'm back. So your question was basically like, what? At what point do they get convinced?
Yeah, is it just Bitcoin's going to reach a certain market cap value, or is it going to be it's been adopted by too many countries? What is something? And I know I'm having you answer such a speculative question of can you read Charlie Munger's mind?
I just think it doesn't matter, right? Like, there were plenty of people who didn't understand the internet when it came out and didn't hop on board the computing wave and didn't hop onto mobile, right? Like, people miss waves all the time. And what ends up happening is it's not about convincing the previous kings that this new land is great land. It's about new kings emerging in the new land. And so I think those people just become less relevant because they're not a part of the most, the most fast growing, high valued companies anymore. And so like, they famously sat out on Google and Facebook and and Twitter and like tons of internet companies that they missed, and they said, "Oh, we don't understand this thing. We don't get how it's valued. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit our kind of mental model." And then finally, they went and moved and bought a bunch of Apple stock. But but fundamentally, I mean, the whole stock market where they play shifted from if you look at the top 20 most valuable companies in the world 15 years ago versus today, there was zero technology companies in there before, and now there's it's pretty much all 80% technology companies now. And um and they missed out on that. Now that doesn't mean they did poorly, right? Berkshire stock did just fine investing in Johnson and Johnson and Coca-Cola and whatever, See's candy and all this other stuff. So they do fine betting in insurance companies, but yeah, they missed out on some massive, wealth appreciation. And sure enough, they come around. By the time they come around, it doesn't really matter what their opinion was. Like, it's obvious. It's obvious that the internet was going to create some really big companies. And so I think it's the same sort of thing. I don't think it matters to when they change their mind, because by the time they do, it'll be too obvious. And even when they change their mind, great, it'll be news for the day. And again, to me, crypto is inevitable, so it doesn't really matter who comes on board first.
I had this thought, and just a quick note to the chat. My internet here in Mexico is a little too unstable, so I'm no longer involved in the chat. So feel free to talk all the shit you want at this point. But it's funny. My girlfriend and I, we've had this conversation a lot recently about, like, soda and sugar and whatnot. And when you reminded me that not only did Berkshire Hathaway invest and like really help build Coca-Cola to like a much more global brand than what it was when it first started, or See's Candy, it's like, Charlie Munger, you've been shilling rat poison for generations.
Yeah,
now.
literal
Sit
human
down.
poison. That's human poison. So
that thought just crept into my mind, and I
and
wanted
he'll
to
say
share
things
that
like
with you.
that, like
I am
he'll
kind
say
of
it's terrible.
curious of what is sort of your
Oh,
sorry.
sorry. No, go ahead. Sorry, I think there's a little delay.
I'm curious what your thoughts are on sort of like what is the worst case scenario for Bitcoin? Like, what is something that you think does? Is it regulations? Is it legislation? Is it a new type of currency?
So I think the there's like two buckets of risk that I think about. There's like the black swan risk, which is somebody figures out how to double spend Bitcoin, 51% attack, whatever. There's these like and usually it's going to be something that we don't really anticipate, but like whatever. There's like black swan risk, low probability, high impact, and then there's like to me it's like the expected game theory response, which is that if I was the government, I would just say, look, I'm not going to clamp down hard. I'm just going to add so much friction that this is not, why would I want to lose my monopoly on money? So I sort of think like, I remember being a poker player, and it was like, oh yeah, like I love playing online poker. This is great. Oh, and the government can't do anything. This company's based in, wherever, the Cayman Islands, or it's based in like, these random ass places. So they can't like shut it down. And if they do, somebody will just pop up a new one. And what the government did was not, they didn't shut down the sites. They said, great, sites you can stay on. We're just going to make the on-ramp and off-ramp, filled with spikes. And so getting money onto the network and getting money off of the network, we're going to make really, really difficult. And so that only the truly motivated are going to go on, and that's fine. We'll let that exist. We don't need it to go to zero. We just need to make sure that it doesn't become mainstream. And so I kind of think that that's like the main risk. What happens is either through taxation or through like the limiting of like banks' ability for a customer to get money from their bank into crypto, right? The fiat to crypto on ramp and off ramp. The more friction they add there, that becomes a sort of an existential drag on adoption. And so I think that's the biggest true risk. That's like higher likelihood than these like black swan events, and significant impact. So I'm glad it doesn't seem to be playing out that way. And I think companies like Coinbase do a great job, because they go and they work with the regulators and the government to make sure that they like kind of are on the same page or as close to it. But I do think that that would be the biggest risk. You're muted.
Uh, I have a hard time complimenting Coinbase. Just simply for my own experience, like I dabbled in the DeFi space. I was trying to make a quick buck. Definitely was trying to flip returns in the same way that I was getting in the stock market, thinking I could do it there. And a trend I learned, and I think there's a lot of data that proves this, is when a new token is introduced on Coinbase, there's a nice big heavy sell off because
Yeah.
all of those pre-mined tokens start getting sold to the unaware institutional or not institutional
Retail.
individual investors.
Yeah.
Retail, thank you. um I'm curious if you buy into the idea of, will Bitcoin only companies enter into public markets, or will they just stay privatized? Because that's just sort of the way, I think, going back to at the very beginning of our conversation, the idea of what the values of Bitcoin are, and to not be in this open public market in the way that it can get manipulated, kind of goes against sort of the values of Bitcoin. Do you think Bitcoin only companies enter those public markets? I mean, they're still raising money in the same way that other unicorn type companies do as well.
So
Other
what do you mean
startups
by
do.
Bitcoin companies? Who are you thinking about here?
So something like Strike, something like
Yeah.
Swan Bitcoin, where essentially their platform is you can only buy Bitcoin. There's no other option well, Cash App is public through Block already, and Block itself has cemented itself as a blockchain but Bitcoin focused company. I think they're the perfect example for a lot of these other companies to replicate going forward. However, it kind of goes back to the idea of, well, why do you need the public markets other than just to appease the people who invested in you early on?
Yeah, well, because you have a fiduciary responsibility. You take money in, you say, I'm going to do what I can to be a good steward of this capital and to return capital. If I so they have a fiduciary responsibility to get the investors a return on their investment or make best efforts to, and so they will do that. That to me, the idea of a company that's Bitcoin only is a company that is dead. Why do I believe that? Because um, there is demand for there's so much demand for non-Bitcoin assets that just voluntarily choosing only Bitcoin is not going to help you grow. It's not going to help get more bit. It's not like people who want Bitcoin are going to say, you know what? Instead of going to this app that makes it convenient for me to have Bitcoin and any asset, I'm going to choose the one that has Bitcoin only because I fundamentally stand by a Bitcoin only philosophy. That's such a small population. Coinbase does over 50% of its volume on non-Bitcoin assets. And so, and they make a ton of money on those assets. And so trust me, these private companies, they want to make a ton of money, and they have to say yes to things that are going to grow their business over time. And if a lot of that growth is coming from non-Bitcoin assets, they'll be silly to keep that off. Even if they are so extremely principled that they say no to customer demand for other assets, like we're not saying instead of Bitcoin, we're saying in addition to, giving people choice. If they're that principled, they're going to just wither away because companies are going to offer both. And like a customer is going to take one that offers both over one that offers one. And so, over time, they're going to get out competed. And because again, this is a protocol that anybody can plug into, anybody can spin up a new exchange or a new offering. Who's going to win? It's the one with the strongest brand in terms of trust and security. It's a good user experience. And lastly, it's going to be giving people what they want, which is going to be over time. You see them all converging to multi-asset, offering custody solutions, offering yield as a service, like a no-brainer yield on your Bitcoin or your other assets. They're all going to do the same things, and they're going to compete fundamentally on brand because there's no technology advantage that really any of them are going to have against each other. There's no other competitive advantage that you're going to have besides your brand. Um, any good feature that one comes out with, nobody has a monopoly on certain coins. Any feature that you come out with, the others will adopt if it's a popular feature, or they will wither away. So I don't really see a future for companies that are going to be Bitcoin only, because you're going to be able to have um, Bitcoin, and if you allow more, and their competitors will, and they will be outcompeted in the open market.
I will be completely honest, Sean. I hope you are wrong. I look forward to you saying that to Jack Dorsey's face one day, and I hope I am there when that conversation is happening live. Uh, I want to give a shout out to Jack Mallers, who made essentially, like, I was a big Coinbaser. A lot of my biggest buys of Bitcoin were happening on Coinbase. And then thank you, Jack Mallers, for introducing Strike on the Lightning Network, and I'm paying almost no fees to buy my Bitcoin. And I think tried and true pure Bitcoin purists, Bitcoin maxis, whatever you want to call them, they value that, the fact that, hey, I don't need to pay Coinbase $2 for the right to go and buy $25 worth of Bitcoin. Those $2 go towards more Bitcoin for me. And in the long run, the way a lot of us see it, or I myself included, that is a net benefit. The $2 today of Bitcoin is probably going to be worth a lot more than we can even imagine for our kids or our grandkids.
So if you're saying that one network offers lower fees, then yeah, I also would move over and I'd buy from somebody that doesn't charge me 2%, right? So that's that's great. But like, well, what happens when they all charge, like the minimum fee that they need to run their business and to keep up with the costs? And so, at that point, you're not competing on price, because again, if one exchange could charge 10 times less than the others, then they'd win, or the others would do the same.
Right.
And so it's really not going to be a price comparison. It's going to be, where do I get what I want? And what I'm saying is that if you look at the numbers, if you look at how many people want Bitcoin only forever versus Bitcoin first and maybe other things later, other things first and maybe Bitcoin later, like the person who wants both is more than the person who by principle says, I would like to cut off my own ability to buy other assets. Like, this is not a thing. That's not a large population of people. And a company that tries to service that group of people will, I believe, fall by the wayside. But, sure, could be wrong, been wrong many times before.
I'm curious, and I know we're going to be wrapping up in a moment here, but do you think there's, like, I absolutely agree. Look, people vote with their money, and the money talks, and the money shows and proves exactly what you're saying. A lot more people are throwing money at just the broader DeFi space. Pretty much any token outside of Bitcoin, they're buying. They are, and it's over 50% market share beyond just Coinbase as well. I think if you look at other platforms that release their data, you will find that number in favor of non-Bitcoin. However, I'm kind of curious if this is a byproduct of two things. One, just being in lockdowns for 2 years ago and having really nothing to do, not a lot going on. And then, on top of that, a little bit of like this gambling buzz that everyone, my generation, our generation, like, we're all in on gambling. We're all in on, sports betting. Meme stocks became a thing for a moment. And now, like, it feels like DeFi is just sort of the flavor of the month for a little bit. Do you think that this is a lasting trend, or will it just be a flash in the pan?
I think it'll be like almost everything in crypto. There is a hype cycle and exuberance. There is a peak of delusion, and then there is a return to sanity. Then there's the trough of sorrow, and then people find utility, and the builders stay in the space, and they keep making it better. And then over time, yeah, these things happen, right? Like, I saw Bitcoin price go from $7 up to $1,000, and then back down to $200, and back up to $20,000, and back down to $3,000, and now it's then 68,000. Now it's at 42,000, right? Like, yeah, why does the price go up and down? Because people's belief wanes and waxes along the way. And so, do I think that NFTs are a flash in the pan, and we're going to look back in 5 years and remember, oh, it's like a Beanie Baby, it's gone, it's not nobody does it anymore? No. So people, I do think that that's going to happen. Do I think that a lot of these NFT projects are going to go to zero? Yeah, absolutely. Do I think that these are going to be the winners 5 years from now? I don't know. Maybe some, maybe, probably not most of them. So I think that that's same thing with DeFi. Do I think we're going to have a dozen protocols launching every month, and that's what's going to be like, they're all going to win? No, of course not. But do I think DeFi is around for the long term? Absolutely. Right. Like, that is an absolute, in my opinion. So I think that there's, like, it kind of depends what you're asking. Are these specific projects going to maintain upward momentum? Not necessarily. Is this technology and this this use case going to be around for the long haul? Yes. So that's what yes, there are these hype cycles in crypto, but in crypto, it's basically speculation drives installation. So speculation brings in builders, brings in capital, brings in attention from the media. And so speculation is actually a feature, not a bug in the world of crypto. Speculation drives the next phase of building in all parts of crypto. And so yeah, I think that's the way that this goes, and it will be no different going forward.
Shaan, this has been an absolute blast. I've enjoyed our entire conversation. I hate the fact that we have to wrap things up. I don't care what anyone says. Anytime you want to chat about this or anything else, man, you are always welcome back. Let our viewers and listeners know where they can find you on Twitter and My First Million podcast as well, and anywhere else.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter. I'm Shaan VP. My name's spelled a little funny. It's SHAAN VP. And then for crypto specifically, every morning I write a crypto like roundup. Basically, it's like, hey, here's what's interesting in the world of crypto, and it's called the Milk Road. So you just go to milkroad.com and we talk about what's going on, what's interesting in the world of crypto that day, what are smart people talking about. And so if you like to follow, you like to get smarter about the stuff just every day with like something that's lighthearted and not overly technical, you should check it out. It's pretty cool.
Awesome, guys. Stick around through our commercial break. And as always, use code YTMAG, get 10% off of your Bitcoin 22 tickets. We'll be joined by my producer, Chris. We're going to break down the executive order before diving into the HODL model with Sam Rule and Root, who created this new technical tool. Stick around and we'll be back shortly.
We're back now. How's it going, Q?
What is up, Chris? We are back. Thank you for joining me. This is the man. If you guys don't realize this, Chris is the man who makes all of this possible. Like everything that you see, he's the one giving out the sats. He's the one who makes it look cool. He's the one who makes all of our little bottom things. He's the full-blown producer of the show. Always a blast having you on, dude. How goes it in nondescript Lake Country?
It's going well. No, it's a team effort though. Q, Alex, and we've got a couple other people working behind the scenes, so it's not just me. But always appreciate being on the show, being co-host with you and Alex.
Shout out Max and Aaron as well, our European brethren. I know you're going to end up listening to this later, so I want to put a smile on your faces. Biden's executive order. Let's just dive right in. I'm sure everyone has had a chance or saw something get posted about this. I'm going to throw this link into the chat right now on YouTube. If you haven't already, take a look. We're going to break this down a little bit. I mean, I want to read actually the one line that I tweeted out and that I literally rolled my eyes, so annoyed and frustrated that this was included, I think, multiple times in the executive order. Treasury will work to promote a fairer, more inclusive, and more efficient financial system, bullshit, while building on our ongoing work to counter illicit finance and prevent risks to financial stability and national security. I don't actually have the numbers in front of me, but I'm willing to literally bet all of my Bitcoin that the US dollar has been used for more illegal transactions than Bitcoin has in the history of both monies. Would you agree or disagree with that? Because I'm about to lose a lot of Bitcoin if I lost.
Sorry, can you repeat it again real quick? I was cleaning up the chat or talking to the chat real quick.
Oh my God, who's this person? Oh man, webcams now? Great. Love it. Love it.
Yeah.
Eastside Tony, click the link. The question was, I'm willing to bet all of the Bitcoin I have that the US dollar has been used for more illicit and illegal activities than Bitcoin has in the lifetime of both of these monies.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, the US dollars, the you know, they say cash is king because that's what's used in the most you know, money laundering and criminal activities. I forget what it was. I don't want to butcher the statistics, but it's like, you know, way higher the amount of transactions that go down with fiat dollars, specifically the US dollar, compared to Bitcoin. I mean, Bitcoin would be really stupid, to be honest, to do illicit activities on it, because you basically are time stamping in, you know, a time chain for forever for someone to see that if they can eventually figure out that this transaction was to do something illicit or illegal, you know, it's only a matter of time. And as chain analysis companies, as much as we don't like them, you know, they're trying to look for you and bad actors.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's a weird and unfortunate thing that like gets roped in. We talked about it a little with Shaan about like, you know, the Silk Road of it all. And that's sort of like, that's how I first learned about Bitcoin, was when I was trying to buy weed in college and ship it over to DC. It was Silk Road. And that was sort of my first exposure to Bitcoin. So to a degree, I understand, but like, let's be adults. Let's learn and grow. Things change, people grow, businesses change and iterate. I mean, MicroStrategy is the perfect example of that. They were just a data mining company. They would just collect data, and then they transitioned to essentially being like a data analytics firm. They were the first data analytics firm to really exist. Shout out Michael Saylor for that, because like that launched what my second career was. And then now they're just for all intents and purposes, they're just a Bitcoin ETF. But again, perfect example of, you know, changing your business model year after year after year. I am also curious though of your thoughts on just this idea that, you know, there's going to be more investment in a potential CBDC, whether or not this is going to be actually like a new token introduced by the US government, whether Jerome Powell is going to go, I don't know, Powell this up, if you will. I'm curious your thoughts on just like the idea of a CBDC being introduced by a government, specifically the US government.
Yeah, I think the CBDC it's going to be introduced. I think we're definitely further behind than China for their digital yuan. Not saying it's a good thing. What's the easiest way that they're going to get people to do this? And I think it's going to be a seamless conversion. I mean, the majority of dollars that most people hold is in bank accounts or in assets, or, you know, like how much cash do you have in your wallet? That's the amount of cash that most people have, you know, whether that's small or a lot or whatever. But I'd say the majority of wealth is either in the form of, you know, taking out debt to get a rental property that you have income to come in, or you have money in your bank account. I think they're going to transition pretty seamlessly. I'd say like they're just gonna call it like digital dollars, but they're gonna look the same. Maybe in the beginning they denote them differently, but they're gonna buy the same. But it's very dangerous. I mean, the way that they're going to get people to use it is they're just going to give people money. I mean, just look when 2020 happened and they were giving out $1,200 checks. You know, where did those come from? Just out of nowhere. Yeah, it's like we're going to pay for it one way or the other, whether we're paying for a tax or we're seeing inflation now 2 years later. That's like record highs in the last, you know, 50, 60, 70 years. And it's only getting worse. Yeah, I mean, I think we're behind China, and I know it's not a good thing to be in front of them. If the US had a better digital CBDC, I don't know if that's good or bad, or I'm just kind of indifferent. I think it's very much the similar kind of thing. They're going to try and force the dollar to remain the global reserve status. You get all the privileges that you have, but then they're going to do exactly, imagine instead of having to go to banks and having them wire or to kick them off the SWIFT system, with a CBDC, they can just program it to be digital money to just stop being transacting as it is. So yeah, I mean, I know Jimmy Song, I believe, was saying recently when he went to the Freedom Economic Forum in Oslo. Is that Norway or Sweden? I forget.
Norway.
Norway. When he went there, when he went to the Oslo Freedom Forum in 2021, he was talking to one of the few guys that had escaped North Korea. And he's like, so like, how does this happen? Like how are people so subservient to the government? Like, how did you get from where you were to where you are now? And he's like, oh, it's very easy. You know, actually, I don't know if he's from North Korea or Russia, but whatever. He's like, you just keep giving people free stuff. And Jimmy was kind of like taken back. Like, what do you mean you just give them free stuff? He's like, you give everyone a free car, or, you know, I'm just overhyping the example, but you give everyone a free car. It's like, oh, wow, this is great. This is awesome. And then it's like, oh, okay, but I don't want to pay more taxes. It's like, well, if you don't want to pay more taxes, then we take the car away. It's like, oh, okay, like we're going to give everyone like free vaccines. And this is not for or against vaccines, but it's like, oh, well, I really don't want to do this. Well, it's like, oh, then we cut you off your healthcare. It's like, oh, like, you know, we give you a free house. And it's like, oh, well, I don't really agree with the guy that's in power, or maybe he's like trying to squash peaceful protesters. It's like, oh, well, then we're going to come with guns in the middle of the night and take you away from your house. So like, this is how it is. They give you all this free stuff, but it always comes with a catch. You know what I mean? Free money is not free money. You know, you have to shill whatever they want, or basically push the narrative that they want. That's how they co-opted media. That's how they co-opt politicians. That's how they co-opt many people. It comes down to the money. The money's not the root of all evil. But it's a tool, but you know, we're trying to fix the money because the tool that we have is a problem and causing issues. Sorry, that was a long-winded response.
No, I mean, look, what's that old saying? Nothing in life is free. And I know, especially over the last 2 years, those of us who've, I think, had our eyes open are recognizing and seeing certain things. Like, I think the perfect example is Facebook. Oh, this is a free software, free program. I think I just caught that fly. Nope, I didn't. I thought I caught a fly just straight up with my hand. But like, we were the product. We were the thing they were collecting. The data that they were collecting was us. And to your point, like, look, there are some things the government gives us for free, like public education, you know, public parks. Those are pretty much the two things that I appreciate. I don't think a lot of the other things that they think they're giving to us for free are the most necessary or the most well-maintained, in my opinion. But yeah, like they dangle that carrot just enough so that you become dependent on them. I mean, I can dive down that rabbit hole, and I think you and I have before, just about the idea or concept of what the public education system that's been gifted to us, and I'll say it in a generous way like that, when in reality it's just created a bunch of employees, and you have conversations with people who don't necessarily adhere to the public education model that we have now. And I mean, the conversations I have in those circles are vastly different than those where, you know, the public education system just, again, it just teaches you to be an employee. Just do the work that's in front of you. Don't ask questions, just do this work and move on to the next assignment. That's just a job. It's literally just a job. Any shitty job is that. It's, hey, do the assignment that your boss gave you. Don't ask questions, just get it done and then move on to the next one. That's no different than what was going on in public high schools. Do this homework assignment. Don't ask questions. Don't ask too many questions about it. Get it turned in on time and then move on to the next assignment. I want to focus more on the EO rather than broadening it out. Like, do you think it's a good thing or a bad thing that Bitcoin literally was not specified in any of this statement?
I don't know if it's a good or a bad thing. I think it's just kind of like I don't want to say they're planning their attack, but it was kind of like a nothing burger when I was reading into it. I think they're trying to set up for a CBDC. They're trying to get more things on the table to start regulating it more. It kind of seemed like Joe Biden, at least in the way that it was written, that the executive order was just kind of like telling the agencies, like, you're doing a crap job, do a better job and do more. By them doing more, that might be cracking down on things more. I'm not really sure what it meant. I will push back on the one thing that you said, though. Like, I mean, while school is free in the sense that, like, you have to go, it's still like taken out one way or through the other through taxes. Yeah. And even parks, yeah, they're free, but it's kind of funny. It's like they took out taxes at one point, they built the park, and then it's like, you're free to use. It's like, yeah, well, you charged us 50 years ago or our grandparents or whatever. And now it's just like anyone can go here and we kind of maintain it. But
I can clarify that in saying that literally everything that is under this umbrella of the government provides for us, our fire departments, our police departments, all of this stuff that is free. I'm going to put it in quotes. You're absolutely right. It is literally, it comes from our tax dollars, and that funds it. And I think that's the inherent issue. I think that worries me about this executive order is this is an attempt, in my opinion, for the government to collect more taxes. They're trying to set themselves up to figure out a way of maximizing income for themselves through tax dollars, and whether that's through taxing, you're transacting your CBDC. I can see that now. Oh, boom, you owe us 40% worth of your Bitcoin. Alex, who just popped in right now, he famously says like Bitcoin is digital real estate. And a lot of people make that equation. Well, I kind of don't want to make that argument for a while Bitcoin and the broader crypto market is on a spotlight by legislators, because if they start hearing this discussion of, oh, Bitcoin is digital real estate, well, let's tax it like real estate then. That'll be a hell of a lot worse than taxing it like an equity. Because so long as you don't sell, you don't have to pay taxes so long as you're holding it still. And then on top of that, yesterday we talked about this a little bit with Gary, but the wash sale rule doesn't exist in Bitcoin and cryptos yet. I can see a world in the next 18 months where it absolutely is introduced. But in the meantime, like, if you're taking a bath, you bought some Bitcoin at 60K, go sell it right now and go buy it right back. Fine. You're going to lose like $5 or $6 worth of Bitcoin or of sats or Bitcoin or whatever based on those transactions. But you get to write that entire loss off on your tax reports based on the way the law is written right now. Now, again, if too many people do this, in the same way that I'm saying, if too many people start hyping up the idea that Bitcoin is digital real estate, the government's going to wise up to it. They're a business and their income stream is taxes, and we are their customers and clients. So that is, I think, a key point. And thank you for helping me to clarify what I'm trying to say about the government's free offerings to us. If you don't see that transaction happening in front of your eyes, if you're not paying for the right to go to the beach, if you're not paying for the right to enter your school, you're not thinking, oh, this is costing me money. Whereas you're probably paying way too much in your property taxes, your income taxes, your state income taxes, your sales taxes. The fact that we have that many different types of taxes is kind of absurd. Do you not agree?
Yeah, I do agree. I mean, it's, you're taxed one way or the other, whether you're holding the currency and they're inflating it away by printing it more. You have an income tax, you have a sales tax, you have a property tax. Soon there's going to be a breathing tax because of carbon credits or whatever. Like, I can definitely see a joke like that trying to come up. It is no joke that Janet Yellen says that she wants to do this unrealized capital gains tax. I know that she's protected, quote unquote, protected by a lot of her friends at big banks. I mean, 2019 was probably the best year of her career. She pulled in just over $7 million. So I'm sure when she's like, oh, it's really cool if we can raise taxes more, it's like, well, are you including yourself in that, Janet? Or was it just so easy giving about 40 hours of talks that the $7 million that you made when you're paying 50% tax, but you really didn't do anything and you got 3.5, hell, I'll pay 50% tax if I gave, 41 hour speeches over the course of 2019. That's a pretty easy 3.5 mil. But going aside from that, I will clarify one thing. I think the wash rule was actually gone starting January 1 of this year, because in the infrastructure bill, I need to check on that. I forget if it starts January 1 of 2022 or January 1 of 2023, but I believe in the infrastructure bill, it was put in there. If I could be mistaken, if it was meant for the Build Back Better bill, which is still held up and didn't go through, but I'm almost sure that they put in a wash sale rule for Bitcoin. I am not a financial, tax professional. Q is neither. So I'll just caveat it for both of us. Make sure that you follow up with your tax professional and someone that specifically knows about crypto and Bitcoin in general. But I'm like 90% sure that loophole was already closed. So if you're doing stuff in 2022, you might be hit with it in 2023's tax time. So just be wary of that and ask someone before doing it yourself. Q.
I believe what I'm quickly just Googling, it was included in the Build Back Better Act, but that hasn't I don't believe that passed. Did
No,
it?
it didn't. So I guess you can still take advantage of it. I would still run it by a
But
tax
yes, let's
professional.
full disclosure, neither of us are financial advisors. This is not financial advice. This is not tax advice. I still need to file my taxes, to be quite honest with you. So yes, check with your financial advisors, check with your accountant if you have one. There was something I wanted to bring up now that was we were talking about. No, I did not get my federal refund yet, Alex. I need to submit my tax return first. But I'm really, I'm really happy at one thing, which was the only equities I sold last year were just losses. So I'm sitting on a nice little bag right now. But that also means that my income level is going to decrease just enough, I think, to take me out of a tax bracket, which I'm very excited to get a nice hefty return.
Just letting you know, you're only taxed like on a progressive tax return. So like, even if it was only $100 over, you'd only be taxed at the higher bracket for that extra $100. But yeah.
No, I get that. Oh, okay. I have an unpopular opinion about the taxing unrealized capital gains. And yes, that is suggesting that I do agree with it. I don't. I think it's moronic. However, here's an idea to throw out into the universe. What if that tax on unrealized capital gains started at $1 billion with a B? If someone like Elon Musk all of a sudden has multiple billions of dollars of unrealized capital gains, your hand is now forced. You have one of two options. You pay the unrealized capital gains tax, or you sell some of your equities so that you get below this threshold, and you're still going to end up having to pay taxes because now you have realized capital gains. This only affects a small portion of class. Alex is already not down with that. I told you, unpopular opinion. This is not.
I've already got a rebuttal, Alex. Don't you worry.
All right, then rebuttal away. Let's break this down because I haven't fully.
Q, what I'm holding up right now, I am a 200 trillionaire in Zimbabwe dollars. Just a reminder that all fiat dollars go to zero on a relative basis compared to assets, specifically Bitcoin. My problem with that is, we have a rule that you're supposed to report to the IRS $10,000 if you do that transaction in cash or whatever. Now that same $10,000 when it was input in the 70s is now the equivalent of, like, with inflation, is like $68,000 or $70,000. So we're printing money like it's going out of style. It's only going to get worse. I mean, by the end of it, a couple decades from now, we all might be billionaires, to be honest.
No, you're honestly right. I mean, look, yes, Alex, I don't want when I become a billionaire, when you become a billionaire, that we have to pay some inordinate tax. I do, however, buy into the actually, no, I don't. Government doesn't sign it officially anyways. I think these were my hardcore progressive days where I came up with this idea and literally had like a whole idea of like, this is how you do it. This is how you approach it. This is how the money gets doled out appropriately. But of course, that's never how it happened. The government has yet to prove to me that they can. Honestly, that's not a bad idea. Alex McShane, our other host on the show, is throwing out the idea of, what if they just burned our tax dollars, like literally collected that money and just burned it? I mean, look, hey, for my Iranians out there, Shaan Puri is coming up in a few days. Maybe we'll use some USD as a kindling when we start up those fires to jump over. But in the meantime, like, yes, the idea of killing some of the dollars, for lack of a better word, while we are also having dollars come every single day, more dollars are being printed, and we need to balance this in some way. I mean, look, I'm gonna go down this rabbit hole for a hot second, but like, ETH introduced exactly what you're describing, Alex. They, on each transaction, are burning some ETH, taking it out of the supply while new ETH is also being minted. It's attempting to do exactly what you're describing. I think we can watch ETH and see if this is actually a viable solution. Mind you, the US dollar, I think, is so far gone at this point that there's no coming back from it. But, I like to be hyperbolic sometimes on this show.
They actually still don't do it yet. I do not support ETH in any regard. I don't hold any. I did at one point very briefly. That was my brief shit coining moment. But I mean, they say they want to do it, but like realistically, they can't. They could say it, and then even if they get it implemented, they're going to run into an issue that we're seeing right now. Like, it's a deflationary world with like an inflationary money supply, and they're going to be forced, if more people want to build on top of ETH, technically they would be priced out, where Bitcoin, you could store your wealth in a deflationary currency or currency that's diminishing. But yeah, I mean, it's co-opted by the World Economic Forum. And, the goal of a lot of the shit coins is they build on ETH and they prop up ETH's price while pumping and dumping things that are built on Ethereum. So basically their goal is to always keep ETH's price up while building all these other side chains, altcoins, whatever you want to say it. And so that's why it's just like, Bernie Madoff got away with this for 40, 50 years. Doesn't mean that it's a good investment. Q, I'm going to pitch this to you. And this is not putting you on the spot. It's just, let's just say I were to come with you and I would say, I have an investment and I know, or we can speculate that it's going to return you millions, if not billions of dollars. But here's the caveat. You start looking into my business, and what we do is immoral and unjust, like child labor, and I won't call out any companies that do it. Is that worth the investment?
No, not for me.
Yeah,
not for
exactly.
Me.
And that's kind of my thing. I'm not saying ETH does that, but like, when you start digging into investments and stuff like that, it's like there's definitely a moral line to investing. And I know Larry Fink in his newsletters is always like, oh, ESG and equality for all is kind of what the World Economic Forum says. But you just look at the things that they do, and it's very unjust. And it's more of, we're going to pitch you this fake narrative. You give us our dollar, you give us your dollars, and we're going to say, and we're going to market, and we're going to do all these good things. But at the end of the day, it's kind of unjust. And I know there's a great article on Bitcoin Magazine, the moral case for Bitcoin. I forget who wrote it. I'm drawing a blank. I don't know if it was Nick Carter, or I don't want to give it the wrong credit, but yeah, I know the moral case for Bitcoin was written. Maybe it was even Pete Rizzo.
Jimmy Song.
Jimmy Song wrote it. Okay.
Jimmy Song. I mean, I found it on Medium really quickly, but I do look. I am a Bitcoiner. I'm a true believer in Bitcoin, the future that it can provide and what it can do. I also, however, do believe that there is a place for Ethereum. I think in my lifetime, I will not see the dollar ever die. I think the dollar will exist in a capacity. What that capacity looks like in the future is probably going to be vastly different than what it looks like now. But that's sort of my belief and my stance on it. I do have to correct one thing you said, Chris. Ever since EIP 1559 was introduced for ETH, as that update came out, they've been burning ETH now. So that has been happening. So we can sort of, to go back to what Alex had introduced and brought up, we can watch sort of what the effect of essentially burning some of your supply while new supply is always being introduced looks like. And to your point, dude, every day a new DeFi token, a new NFT gets minted off of ETH. I mean, look, I think NFTs are scams. I got into this, not argument, not debate, but like a valid discussion with a friend where he was like, yo, you should buy this NFT. Like, I just made so much money, like just throw some of your ETH onto it. Like, we'll make some money and it'll be great. I've kind of come to a point in my life where I need to make more money. I do, to live the lifestyle that I want to eventually live. But I've made enough money and done it in ways that I'm proud of, where I don't feel like I need to go out of my way to make money in either a shady or a sketchy way, or in a way that I make money. I'm going to say this and then I will follow it up, but I don't want to be making money off of the tail of someone losing a lot. And I say that having made a good chunk of my net worth in the stock market. So I understand. I'm literally, why can't I think of the word right now? I'm bulking on what I'm saying more or less, but look, everyone's entitled to make money how they see fit. If the company Chris just described to you is like, dude, I don't care, like, money is money. I'm gonna make as much as possible. That's on you, man. I wish you the best of luck, but karma will kick your ass. That's my 2 cents on that.
Yeah. I guess, Q, do you have any ideas or thoughts on the executive order? Is it a nothing burger? Are you more concerned about it? Are you concerned about the CBDCs or at least the research in the next couple of years? Because it's not going to happen overnight.
I think I am of the group, and I won't try to say that this is an original thought, but when it was presented, I think in Cafe Bitcoin Spaces, which is hosted every morning on the Bitcoin Magazine Twitter account, I believe it was Odell or someone brought up or maybe even CK, the idea that they're just going to end up acquiring a different already established stable coin and like let that be the US dollar stable coin. And there is a US dollar stable coin already circulating that the central bank has no part or tie in with. So whether or not this is good or bad for Bitcoin, I'm not going to make that judgment call right now. I still stand on the side of all press is good press. You now have Biden talking about this. You now have White House starting to craft and discuss legislation for this space at large. Unfortunately, I think when you have people who don't know what they're talking about and discussing, they're just going to call crypto everything, and that includes Bitcoin. I truly admire someone like Cynthia Loomis, who continues to push forward and help educate her peers and colleagues and make sure that Bitcoin itself is being watched after and taken care of. I've said loudly, and I will continue to say, I don't buy any of these politicians who are cozying up to Bitcoin for the sake of votes. I think that's all they are doing, especially those who have yet to be in office. But I look forward to being proven wrong by any of them who are elected and actually put forward proper, good Bitcoin legislation. The truth is, proper, good Bitcoin legislation is no legislation at all. I look forward to a day where Strike can just operate in any country because there's no government intervening and saying, hey, you need to set up shop or give us information or whatever is required in whatever country to set up. We live in a digital age. This is the information age. It has already begun. Those of us that are aware are fully entrenched in it. We live in a digital world. We interact digitally on a day-to-day basis. Not everyone is there yet, but in a generation's time, it will be. I think our generation will be one of the last to really experience certain things in real life. And like one of those is education, whether or not we agree with that, whether or not you think I'll actually caveat that, specifically college education, like the idea of having like a 4-year college experience on campus, like that will be a very rare experience in the future. I also think, and I hope at least, college admissions go down, but that's a conversation. I'm going down a rabbit hole and just rambling at this point. So to answer your question, I think it's a net positive in the sense that all press is good press. I would like to see no legislation as far as Bitcoin is concerned. And I'm hopeful that someone like Cynthia Loomis will step in and essentially prevent the idiots from doing something wrong.
Yeah. I mean, there was a great chart by Preston Pish. I forget if it was his chart or if he just retweeted it months ago, where it showed anywhere that the government intervenes or backstops, and it showed the price of all these things going up, and then things that they don't touch as prices go down. I mean, just some of the big ones were education, college prices rising way faster than inflation, or, you know, if you're not including that in your CPI index, very interesting. Housing prices with a lot of the loan programs, whether it's VA or FHA loans. Not to, you know, I'm not against anyone buying a home, but when they're backing them at all costs, I mean, that's kind of what got us into the 2008 financial crisis. And there's just a whole laundry list of other things that they didn't backstop or help were like different forms of technology, obviously TVs, cars, stuff like that. People said that they can backstop them or help them in the form of giving them beneficial tax treatment when they form a business or a corporation or an S corporation. But I mean, that's kind of similar across all industries, but they're like not backstopping them completely. Although there was a bailout of GM by back in 2008 in that financial crisis as well to prevent GM, and I don't know if it was also Ford, from going out of business. Because I know, aside from a lot of people that work there, I know that they always talk about the big four in equities of the big dividend paying stocks. I believe it's AT&T, GM, Ford, and I always forget the last one. It's not Coca-Cola, but it's another company, Q. I don't know if you know off the top of your head. It's the big four dividend kings. I'll look it up while you add any more color to that.
I mean, look, I think we're entering this very precarious time in just society and human history. To be honest, I'm not as familiar with dividend stocks. Like that was actually one of the things where when I was sort of going down my stock rabbit hole, I remember having a conversation with some friends where they were like, why don't you ever talk about dividends as like a positive thing for a stock? And it's because for myself, like some of these dividend stocks had not worked for some time. When Shaan was on, we kind of talked about how, like, Berkshire Hathaway, they made a lot of money and were very, very successful over the years by not investing in tech and investing in high dividend paying stocks, or, doing more traditional value investing. And that's a long time preference, or actually, yeah, long time preference style of investing. But I don't know if that's going to be a viable way to approach markets going forward. I think there's too much going on. I think we're watching China over the last 18 months start to hammer down on their companies. We see US legislators now getting nervous about Chinese stocks. China is now forcing their stocks to be delisted. Is it a play to essentially have their stock market compete and, in their eyes, supplant the New York Stock Exchange as the global leader of a stock market, whatever that looks like in the future? I think absolutely. Because Xi Jinping is seeing all of these Chinese companies that are founded in his country, operating in his country, making so many billions of dollars being traded in the US markets. They're still being traded in other markets, Hong Kong. Yeah, I'm gonna just stick to the Hong Kong, because I think I'm mixing up some Asian countries in my head really quickly, and I don't want it to misspeak. And again, a lot of this then turns back into what is this whole, how do things pan out with Russia, Ukraine, and more importantly, China and Taiwan. We're witnessing, I think, in our lifetime, the first real attempt at trying to take global power away from the US in any way possible, through dollar dominance, through energy dominance, and through just sheer influence and status on a global stage. Most of us, I don't think, watch international news. I don't think most of us take the time to really, to like really understand sort of what other countries say about the way America handles things, or the way and things that go on in America. The truth is, most countries just don't care. Like, they're over us, they're over our shit, and it's like they're more focused on what they can do at home. That was not the case 20 years ago. 20 years ago, you watch the news out of wherever, and it's an hour-long program, and you get 45 minutes, or 3/4 of the program, not 45 minutes, but 3/4 of the program is about the US. And then the rest of the program is about their country and what they can do. It's fascinating because we don't have that influence anymore. It doesn't exist. And I think it's due in large part to the digitization of society. And that feeds into the digitization of money. Enter Bitcoin. I'll always bring it back to Bitcoin.
Yeah. I think Bitcoin goes against not just, the US hegemony, but China, obviously they banned it. Russia kind of was adopting crypto loosely in general, but I think it's good for the people. It's good for the individual. I know CK always talks about the sovereign individual and how great of a book it is. I know he will be giving them out at Bitcoin 2022. So make sure you guys get your tickets to Bitcoin 2022. It is the biggest and best Bitcoin conference there is in the world. It's going to be in Miami Beach, Florida. It's going to be an absolute blast. Remember to use code YTMAG or YTMAG for 10% off your tickets. All right, it looks like Q needs to get wrapping up here, and then we're going to be going into the deep dive where we have the rational root and Sam Rule on, as well as joined by CK Snarks. So we're going to go to a quick commercial break. We're going to get all set up there, and really looking forward to this next segment of the deep dive. Talk to you guys in a little bit.
Y'all, I am so excited to bring another segment of the deep dive over here on Bitcoin Magazine Live. I'm really excited to get this segment started with Root. I know Dylan and Sam are cruising into the spaces soon, and they're already on YouTube. And yeah, this version of the deep dive is going to be exploring Root's amazing HODL model that he released with Bitcoin Magazine this Monday, and earlier last week gave a preview to all the deep dive subscribers. So really excited to get into it and to tease it out. Yeah, I mean, I know before we get started, and I know, again, Sam's still kind of creeping in, and we have another minute here before we're officially going. Dylan, do you want to talk about the deep dive, what you're doing there, kind of give a quick plug for all the listeners?
Yeah, sure. I'm not in the spaces yet. So I requested to speak there. I don't know if you want me to wait. But for the non-space listeners,
yeah, the deep dive. It's going through. Here you go.
Cool. Yeah. So we're gonna be breaking down Root's article today about kind of a really interesting model with a liquid supply, but which he graciously offered to post first with the deep dive, which we sent out to subs on Friday. But basically, the deep dive is kind of a total market newsletter, research analysis around Bitcoin, and we increasingly incorporate kind of the macroeconomic backdrop with our thesis that Bitcoin is the best money ever. And so we offer kind of not trading advice or entries or anything like that, but more so just broad-based analysis. We try to present an unbiased perspective, obviously with the underlying thesis that Bitcoin is the best money ever, and we're just kind of documenting the monetization process with math and numbers. So excited to dig in here today. But that's basically an overview of what we do.
Dylan, outside of the model, anything that you want to jump in on or touch on regarding the market? I guess maybe we can jump in on that too. But yeah, we'll save that for the end. Want to pass the mic over to Root, the star of this Spaces, and maybe he can kind of talk a little bit about the impetus for the model before we get into the details.
Hey guys, thank you so much for having me all. You can all hear me good?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, perfect. So yeah, thank you so much. Really excited for this conversation on my model. It's not, I mean, it's a relative simple model in a way, but it's still modeling one of the most important trends in Bitcoin that I think that is maybe underappreciated, which is the growth of a liquid supply. And so usually, you know, we only talk about price models and so forth, but this model is actually about Bitcoin supply, and that gives interesting insights that were, you know, previously still kind of untouched or like untapped. So I think it will be an interesting conversation. Look forward also to some of your opinions, Dylan. Sam obviously has done a great job with helping me write the article, and it's you know, excited to hop into the charts.
Yeah, do you want to just give a broad overview of kind of, you know, just like a quick rundown of what it is, and you know, for our listeners, like a TLDR, and then we can really dig deep into it, or you want to just start off at the top?
No, we can. I can give like a quick summary. So basically, there's the trend within Bitcoin is basically that illiquid supply has been kind of outpacing new supply issuance lately, and so more or less since the third halving, which is a very interesting trend. And so the HODL model tries to kind of model the behavior of a liquid supply into the future. And that gives very interesting insights because, you know, we can look at things. I haven't shared those insights yet, but there are certain things that we can look at. Like, for example, we can better estimate how much the halving will impact. You know, if you look at previous halvings, they were always the catalyst for new cycles. And so if we look at the HODL model, we can actually kind of project like the impact that the halvings will have in the future. And so we can, you know, better, you know, we can see if, you know, how much impact it's going to have on Bitcoin cycles, because we're kind of breaking loose of this 4-year cycle trend. You know, the 4-year cycle trend was all obviously based on the halvings. And so now we got to a point where, we are kind of breaking loose, and, you know, still for the last cycle, the halving was still the major catalyst to set this bull market, to be the start of the bull market. But I think into the future, you know, halvings are going to play a less significant role. And so perhaps like other catalysts will also have more, effect on cycle behavior. And so I think we could actually see, I've done another spaces on this before about kind of the supply dynamics, but you could kind of see that the supply dynamics of the 2017 cycle, in the last 2 years, we kind of repeated that same pattern in terms of long-term holder, short-term holder behavior. And I think that's very interesting, because that could mean that, if we were to see, for example, prices above 100K, I mean, one point, before next halving, then one way to view it is that, we have a lengthening cycle, but the other way to view it is that we have just a complete different, like, new cycle. And we can actually see now that, short-term holders are kind of out of the market. So, the hype is truly gone at this point. We're really, making a bottom here, it seems like, based on long-term holder behavior. And so it's very interesting to see, like, from this different perspective, that if illiquid supply is growing, and which we can actually see because we made the 69K all-time highs, we basically made just based on long-term holder behavior, because also already the short-term holders were kind of out of the market. And I think that is that those are very interesting dynamics, and it could really give a change of cycle behavior into the future. And I think the HODL model will kind of help with looking at this cycle behavior, and it can give insights into what the cycle might do. And so I think that's very interesting. And there's still many unknown factors, and it's also I presented it as a hypothesis. There's no truth here yet, or there's still many uncertainties, and for sure more research is needed. But we can't deny the interesting aspects and the perspective that the HODL model provides in a way. And so yeah, I think that's very interesting to discuss.
So for maybe any listeners that aren't too familiar with on-chain analysis, what is a liquid supply, and why, and how could we possibly say certain Bitcoin is illiquid or liquid or highly liquid? What's the quantification there?
Yeah, so the quantification is basically on a scale from 0 to 1. We can classify what the supply is, and so we actually look at entities, and this is all Glassnode's data, right? So illiquid supply is also it's based on entities. So entities that spend less than 25% of their supply, they are classified as illiquid. And so the other, so if you spend more than 25%, you will be classified as either liquid or highly liquid. So that is the classification here. And so illiquid supply are basically entities within the space that spend very little of their supply. Obviously, there's some spending, because even a long-term holder like a hodler will still occasionally maybe spend a little. He will be mainly stacking, and but he will still have some spendings. But so that is incorporated in illiquid supply as well. But still, we can kind of say that illiquid supply very much represents HODL behavior. And as for long-term holder supply, so they overlap also quite a bit. So supply can be either divided into liquid and illiquid supply, but on the other hand, you can also divide it into short-term holder, long-term holder supply, and supply on exchanges, which is another division that Glassnode does. The long-term holder supply very much overlaps with illiquid supply, and also kind of represents this HODL behavior within the space. Did you have a question, CK?
No, I just wanted to jump in and show the YouTube link that is the second pinned tweet in the nest for those who actually want to go see charts as well as our beautiful faces throughout this conversation. We are simul-streaming this both on YouTube as well as on Twitter Spaces. So go check out Root's face as well as his charts by clicking in on that YouTube link. But yeah, want to hand it back to Dylan, Sam, and Root.
Yeah, I'm happy to maybe give color on that too, just expand. So in terms of the liquid supply quantification too, I think it's important to note that any time through history of a liquid or highly liquid entity, which, investor, individual, they can have a liquid supply or be in a liquid supply entity. And then they can also, through different behavior, be a highly liquid, depending on how much coins they spend as well. So that's like a fluid over time. It's not necessarily like these are set in stone. So you'll see plenty of times, which you can go through some of the charts, where a liquid supply changes maybe in kind of a significant or relatively pretty strong way. And anyone who wants more of that, within the HODL model article on Bitcoin Magazine, there's just a great excerpt by Glassnode team and Raphael, the co-founder there, that walk through the whole quantification analysis of liquid supply that's built on. So you can check that in the resources references at the bottom too.
Yeah, I think the coolest part about the liquid supplies or just some of these metrics is that, anecdotally, everybody can kind of feel, whether it's friends, yourself, associates, where, people are hodling, but and don't like to spend their coins, and more of that probably free float is in that cohort. And so with something like a liquid supply, we can actually kind of, and it's not perfect, obviously, but we can actually kind of, mathematically show that this is occurring with some of this data analysis.
Exactly, and to add to that, so one person can be multiple entities in a way, you know, speaking for myself. So you can have a long-term stack, you know, that you're just kind of stacking sats, and you can also have another wallet which maybe might totally disconnected from the first one, which you use for maybe some payments and for some lightning and all kinds of other stuff. And so I still think, yeah, it's a very good quantification. Obviously, it's not perfect. But I think it does represent the HODL behavior, and so it's the best we've got, obviously, as well. I think it comes very close with, you know, you cannot do much better in a way, right, than this. So that's very cool. So yeah, I don't know, maybe we can go into the chart, or you guys have still some other questions or things you want to mention before we hop into that.
Take it away, man.
Okay, so also on for the ones that are following us through Spaces, the last tweet I put out, I also included the charts, so you can go to that tweet on my profile, as well. Obviously, on the YouTube channel, we will put up the charts, so you can follow along more easily. I don't know who is Chris. Are you gonna share the charts on screen, or? Okay.
So yeah, Root, do you want to jump through the liquid supply?
Yeah, I cannot see the charts in my on my screen, but I'll get them up as well. Just give me a second. Okay,
Yep,
so
sorry.
the liquids.
They're being shown on YouTube. So yeah, you can pull them up personally or on YouTube.
Yeah. Yeah, so I got the liquid supply chart up, and so basically here you see in orange the circulating supply, and in blue the liquid supply. And at the beginning, you can see that most of the liquid supply, most of the circulating supply was illiquid supply, and that kind of moved so down a bit. The liquid supply became less as a percentage of the circulating supply. But you can also see the growth rate here per halving. So you know, in the first halving, we had about 7,500 coins per day that were added to the new supply. And we had about 6,000 or close to 6,000 per day that were added to illiquid supply. So illiquid supply, the growth of illiquid supply, the pace was slower than circulating supply, and this actually discontinued. So we can see that the growth rate of illiquid supply versus circulating supply in the second halving was also less, and so the gap between circulating supply and illiquid supply actually grew. And so in also between the second and third halving, we had between the second and third halving, we had about 2,000 coins a day on average. And for the growth of a liquid supply, that was only about 1,000 coins a day. So it grew almost twice as slow. And so, but then we got to some, like the lowest point of a liquid supply, which you can see in the chart. It's highlighted with this a black line with arrows. And so we got to a liquid supply. The lowest percentage was 71.5%, more or less, of the circulating supply. And since that, we've kind of been growing. And so if we look then at the current halving, we can actually see that the circulating supply only grows with 900 coins a day, and the liquid supply is actually growing now with almost double that amount. So that is a very interesting trend. And obviously this has to do with the halvings, right? So the halvings, so on one hand, the halvings cause circulating supply to grow less fast. The block reward halves every halving. And so an illiquid supply seems to be picking up in pace. So now we're growing faster than we were in the previous halving. And I think that's a very interesting trend. And because obviously when there's less supply I call it available supply. So the supply that is available for trade, if we have less available supply for trade, then obviously that affects price, or it's very likely to affect price. If there is demand, obviously, because if there's no demand, it won't affect price. But considering like we have demand, it will surely affect price, and we will get later into some charts that show this as well. So that is basically the chart of illiquid supply. Currently, we're at more or less 19 million coins in terms of circulating supply. And I think around 14 and a half coins are classified as illiquid. So I don't know if you still have some questions, Dylan and Sam, on this, or some comments.
I guess I have a question. So, part of this is like, here's now this inflection point, and now the pace of growth of a liquid supply is outpacing the circulating supply. Like, why is that so meaningful?
Why is it so meaningful that because obviously the gap between circulating supply and illiquid supply will, become smaller, and so it will put pressure, on it basically represents Bitcoin scarcity, right? So if we let's say that now we have about 5 million coins that are available for trade, if we can go to, for example, 2 million coins that are only available for trade, it will obviously put a lot of pressure on price. And so I think that's the most important dynamic here that we see. And it looks like we crossed a certain inflection point around that third halving, that we started outpacing supply growth in terms of illiquid supply. And so I think that's it's a very important macro trend which will put pressure on price, because we are actually really seeing here in the data what digital scarcity means. And so if this gap further narrows, which seems to be the case, although it seems also that it's not narrowing as fast as as it grew larger, so we kind of in the last 10 years, let's say, we grew from more or less 100% being illiquid to now 70% illiquid, let's say. But to go back from the 70% back to 100, it will take many years. But it likely will not go as fast as we got here. But the important part is that we are going back up and putting pressure on price through scarcity. And so I think that's very cool. I don't know if you still have any questions.
I'm happy to add just a little bit color on this too. So in terms of like yearly totals over the last halving, what you're seeing, you have the daily total here for liquid supply, but if you take the end of year balances for liquid supply over the last 3 years, you're looking at 588,000 Bitcoin added to liquid supply in 2019, 837,000 added in 2020, and 366,000 in 2021. So when we're going through and writing in this in the model, and we'll get into the invalidations and what some of the model shows, but to really change this behavioral shift, this has been something climbing for the last 3 years. And so you'd have to see a massive shift in investor behavior that's fundamentally different, like a mega shock to reverse this. And also maybe compelling too, this is a little after the third halving, but since March 2020, a liquid supply has grown something of 9 to 10%, while circulating supply has grown about 4.5%. So a little bit, like you can see here, double the pace since a little bit more than 2020 as well, kind of which lines up with a big, kind of macroeconomic shift and kind of the COVID 2020 pandemic crash also.
Cool. Yeah, exactly. And then maybe we can hop into the second chart, which is liquid supply as a percentage of circulating supply. Yeah. So if you look at that, so that basically shows what we already saw in the previous chart, but in this case, you see liquid supply as a percentage of circulating supply that we started around like 100%. So all of the supply was kind of classified as a liquid. Then it went down, and we went down to like kind of near the third halving where we started picking up, and this is actually where I spotted the trend first. Because it's less visible in the other chart, but here you can actually clearly see the trend that we made a low there in July 2019, and we started the moving back up, which is very bullish. So yeah, I just wanted to show this out there, this chart, that you can look at it as well as a percentage of circulating supply, because that helps with the next chart especially. So I think we can move probably to the next chart where this chart is also kind of shown. Okay, so if we look then at the HODL model, we can actually see the same charts that we discussed before, but now with the HODL model incorporated. So the HODL model is basically just it's a simple model. It's a log growth curve that tries to estimate illiquid supply behavior into the future, and it got quite a high R-square, so it's quite representative for its growth. And if we then reflect that HODL model onto the percentage chart, you can actually see that blue line again, that we made a low with the HODL model at the third halving, and then we started moving back up. Now the HODL model tries to aim to be a bit of a floor model. I try to keep it conservative because we could model this curve more closely, but I kind of wanted to make conservative estimates. So for example, if we're going to make estimates of how much the next halving would impact, how much impact the next halving will have compared to previous halvings, it's better to have a bit of a conservative estimate than to have maybe an estimate that is not met. So therefore I kept the model rather conservative. You can also see that we're quite a bit above the model now. So in terms of illiquid supply, we're currently around 76%, while the model value is only still around 72 or so. So it's quite a bit above the model. But we can also see, if we look at the second halving, that we also had a trend up at the beginning of that halving, and then we went back down actually and made a low around that third halving. And so there is some room even for the HODL model, for illiquid supply to come back down. Potentially illiquid supply, by the way, is more likely to go down if price rises, right? Why is that? Because obviously, if we have exponential price increases, long-term holders and hodlers are going to take some profit, and so part of that supply will now be classified as liquid. And so if we were to see prices above 100K, I'm sure some hodlers will take some profit, and the liquid supply will go down. But as I said, there's room for that in the model. It's kind of incorporated. But the most important part of the model is that we make this low with the model at the third halving. And so we can kind of see and look at this third halving as the inflection point where basically illiquid supply starts to outpace the current supply. So I don't know if you have still any comments, Sam or Dylan, maybe some questions.
Before they get into it, I just want to make another shout out for YouTube. We are looking at these charts on YouTube, but if you insist on staying to the space, in the nest, the very first chart or tweet that is pinned is a thread that Root posted, and that goes through every single chart, and we are on the third chart. So stay, keep up with the charts either by going over to YouTube. That's the second tweet in the nest, or the third tweet in the nest has the link to that. Or stay up to date with Root's chart that he posted.
Yeah, I would just add some thoughts here too onto this being like almost like a floor in terms of liquid supply percentage, like over time, having this conservative floor where a liquid supply can certainly go above and below, and we see it above here now. And in these sell-off events, one question, I had is like, okay, what's the impact of these sell-off events in terms of a liquid supply? How much does it change? And if we look at like the two previous strong sell-offs, so March 2020, kind of at the high there before COVID crash, and then also July 2021, kind of a big local high that we had there. You see a liquid supply in both those, in the first one go down from 72.5% to 71.8%. So barely a point change in terms of a liquid supply percentage there. And in the latest one in July, you see it go from 76% down to 75% or 74.5 really. So when you have these big sell-off events, you expect some of this liquid supply percentage to change. You expect the liquid supply to transfer to liquid and highly liquid hands as entities and investors change behavior. But really, it's a really small shock relative to the larger trend and the larger floor that's being created over time.
Exactly. And so, if we, I also want to mention that the model could be invalidated. Obviously, if we make a lower low than we had around the inflection point, then obviously we need to rethink the model, or but we have some data to kind of back up why we think this is not the case, and we'll get into those charts as well. Dylan, I don't know if you still have any comments or questions about this, or let me know.
No, man, keep it up, and I think I can add some color and some questions at the end of it.
Okay, cool. So then we can maybe move to the next chart. So to kind of back up a bit, why I think the third halving might really be the inflection point. Well, we could definitely see this already in the model. So if we model illiquid supply with this log growth curve, we get the low at the third halving. So that's one view to say, like, okay, we have this inflection point at the third halving. But we're going to look at some other data why I might think that the model actually might hold, and why it would not be invalidated, for example, with next halving. Now, already Sam mentioned that indeed liquid supply drops with significant rises don't have to be that influential. So we maybe we get only like a percentage drop or so in there. That's already one way to look at it, why we think it might hold. But we can look at some other data as well, why I think that inflection point is the third halving. So for that, we look at the next chart, which is the divergence between like long-term holders illiquid supply and the block reward. So let me know when that chart is up. Okay, cool. So here in orange, we can see the block reward, which obviously, with the halving, it goes down. We're looking at a 30-day moving average here, and you can see why the block reward is kind of stable, right? It started with 50 and then 25 Bitcoin and so forth, like it halved. Why do we have this volatility in the beginning? That's obviously because here we look at daily data. So it's the hash rate in the beginning of Bitcoin was quite volatile as well. So some days we found many blocks, and other days we made a bit less blocks, and so therefore you can see a bit of volatility in that line. That's why I took as well a moving average on that line to kind of filter out the noise a little bit, and so we can see the trend of that orange line. Obviously, we can project it into the future because we know based on Bitcoin's protocol what the halving is going to do for the next halvings. And then we look in black at the long-term holder supply and in blue at the illiquid supply. I put long-term holder supply in here as well. Mainly, I was focused on illiquid supply in this case. So let's first consider that blue line. So with that blue line, we're always kind of below that orange line if we look at the trend. But around the inflection point, so we made that low there in that orange box, and then we crossed the orange line, and we have now been above it for quite some time. And so that's one of those views to look at it. And obviously, it seems logical that if illiquid supply is outpacing new supply issuance, and you can see that clearly in this chart, that new supply, because it's halving, and even if illiquid supply growth would just be a constant, at some point illiquid supply will outpace new supply because the new supply keeps on halving, right? So at some point it's logical that there is going to be an inflection point, and it seems we kind of are at that inflection point now in the third halving if we look at this chart. I also put long-term holder supply in here as well. Now, long-term holder supply is a lot more cyclical. I had to also put a higher moving average on that than illiquid supply to filter out kind of the macro trend here. And so but we can still see that with long-term hold of supply, we have a similar behavior. You know, we're above it. We jumped above it a few times as well in the first halving, the second halving for a little bit, but now we kind of jumped above it bigger than we have ever done in the past. And so again, that kind of confirms that the third halving might be the inflection point. Now, if it would not be, we will certainly find out before the next halving. We would have to fall back below. That would obviously be kind of a negative. But if we kind of stay above it in general, above the orange line, yeah, that would be very bullish, and that would mean that the HODL model will very likely stay intact. And you know, if we were to fall below, it seems to just be more obvious that in the next halvings that come after here, that we will stay above it. You know, like especially if Bitcoin keeps growing as it has been in the past with more or less the same pace, then we should expect that we stay above that orange line. So. Are there any comments that I forgot? Maybe Sam or Dylan. Let me know.
No, I think that's well said. I don't know if we want to go to the next chart or not, but it also might be worth just touching on, not from the supply's perspective for liquid supply and long-term holder supply, but maybe some of the demand assumptions in here or that you have and how that plays into a liquid supply. Because, you know, I see a liquid supply a lot of times too, in terms of this model, is you can have a really bullish liquid supply. And we've talked about liquid supply shock ratios in the past. And I think maybe it's a little bit more of a misunderstood, like kind of short-term trend. It's definitely more of a macro cycle, which is why I like this model projecting out what it looks like relative to new supply issuance. So it might be worth just highlighting some of the demand assumptions in the model as well too.
Yeah, so demand obviously is not a constant, you know, and then so that's why we have this cyclical behavior, especially in long-term holder supply. Yeah, here I kind of tried to filter that out with putting like a large moving average on the long-term holder supply. But if you look at the long-term holder supply in general, it's very cyclical, you know, like so short-term holders come in the market and there's a lot of hype, and so you get this very cyclical behavior. Yeah, I don't know if you still have to add anything in terms of demand.
No, I think it's pretty fair. What I would just say in terms of the model that, you know, this assumes constant flow of demand can be volatile. I think just to reiterate on a liquid supply, since it's talked about a lot, I have to think of that as more of a long-term macro trend and piece. But for a while, like we mentioned before, you know, liquid supply can be as high as it is today, much higher, and then we can kind of have to see a lack of demand over the last year relative to what we've seen before, which doesn't necessarily translate to huge price shocks in the short term, but can more long term, and we can get into the HODL price model as well.
Yeah, exactly. So with demand is indeed not a constant, and I think with the last chart that we'll do, we can better explain that probably. So let's hop into the next chart, which is actually something that was not yet incorporated with the HODL model. That's a chart I've been working on some of this stuff. It's not yet fixed. I mean, I'm still looking at how I can best look at these things. But here, basically what I did is I'm trying to look at the change in price. So I actually look at the derivative of price, you know, and I put a moving average on that. And I do the same for available supply. So with available supply, I actually mean liquid and highly liquid supply, which we've talked about before. So we also look at the change in liquid and highly liquid supply, and we put the same moving average on that as well. And we can kind of see that, you know, these signals kind of, you know, are inversely correlated, which is, you know, very bullish, which meaning that supply, like, so if supply comes down, that price seems to move up, and vice versa, right? So that is it shows again how much of an effect kind of available supply has on price. Now, obviously, it's also affected by demand. That's why we don't get a perfect signal here. So if we have a lot of demand coming in, like in hype as we had in 2017 or now in 21, obviously, it makes this signal a bit less perfect. But if demand were constant, we should assume that we would see here like a perfect signal. But you can still see quite clear that this is kind of inversely correlated, which I think is very bullish. So I don't know if you still have any questions or comments on that, Sam.
No, I would just say, do you want to add any color or comments? We don't have to get too into the weeds, but kind of the curve here, influence from, I know you used Wicked Smarts, kind of stock to FOMO kind of curve, S-curve modeled in here as well. Do you want to talk about any of those differences or kind of how it's created there?
Yeah, so that would be the last chart, the price model. So we were now looking at the change between available supply and the change in price.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Sorry, I had a different chart up on my screen. So yeah, totally. We can get to that.
Yeah. So if we look at the last chart, so that is the HODL price model. Yeah. So that is basically so what I tried to do here, and this is kind of is kind of concluding all that we talked about before, is that if available supply is shrinking, so if illiquid supply is growing, in terms of the percentage of circulating supply, then we could kind of assume that price would make an inverse S-curve. Now, why is that? Because obviously, at the beginning of this chart, you can see that we had very steep price increases because also the supply was, the available supply for trade was very little, right? So you can expect with little supply, Bitcoin basically was very scarce in terms of available supply for trade. So price went up, really significantly. Then that slowed down. So that kind of diminished this, and that is because, the hypothesis here is that because available supply is kind of growing in terms, so more supply is available, so the increases of Bitcoin become, are diminishing. And so we get to that inflection point, the third halving, which is kind of where we made a low or a low in terms of illiquid supply. So that means a high in terms of available supply. So actually, basically, the most of supply available for trade, in Bitcoin's history, we make around that third halving. So therefore, it's quite logical that price will, have less significant increases. And so if we then project that into the future, if available supply again is shrinking, then we could expect that we kind of make this this shape, the same shape as we have in the beginning. We have the inverse shape, after the inflection point. So we make an inverse S-curve. And so there, you can also see the difference. So between this price model is that the blue line, if you think of a log growth curve, which is actually has been quite popular because, we've thought of this always as, Bitcoin's price just because of the increase in market cap and that returns were diminishing in size. But so if we would project a log growth curve into the future, it would stay, the slope of that blue line would continuously be decreasing, right? So, but here the difference is that from the inflection point on in the HODL price model, the slope of the line is actually picking up pace again. Now it's very, the speed at which that slope is picking up pace is very slow because this model is kind of based on the inflection point and on the end point, which the end point is when illiquid supply, when the projections of the HODL model kind of reach, approach 100%. And so we draw this inverse S-curve well into the future. So you cannot see this steep curve up here, but that would be somewhere in 2080, let's say. So that's very far in the future. So it looks very linear behavior here in terms for the next two halvings. And I think that's a very interesting perspective because a very common perspective in Bitcoin is that we have lengthening cycles. And, so you could think that the halving was every time a catalyst for each new cycle and that we have this lengthening cycle behavior because we have, lengthening cycles and diminishing returns. But if we look at it as from this perspective that available supply is shrinking, then I'm not so sure if we should expect diminishing returns, because if available supply is tightening, and we saw in the previous chart as well that they seem to be inversely correlated. So that could mean that we get higher price increases into the future again. So it's that basically we're now around this inflection point still, where we have lowest price increases, because that's also the slope of that blue line is basically at a low at the inflection point. And so that I think is a very interesting perspective. And to give an analogy here, if you think of, if you would only live a year, and you would think of all days are constantly lengthening, and then you get to the summer and you still think like, oh yeah, days are lengthening, we can observe it in the data, but then we suddenly have the longest day in the summer, right? And then days are suddenly shortening. So I think maybe a potential problem for the lengthening cycle theory is that we were just looking at only the past data, which we cannot really observe yet this change. But if we look at the projections of the HODL model, then maybe we might have to think that we might get higher price increases again into the future. So I don't know if you still have any comments, Dylan or Sam, on this.
Yeah, I guess what I would say is just I'm really excited to be watching this data into the next kind of break of all-time highs. Whether that's, I think, partially like this unprecedented macroeconomic environment, decreasing trust with sovereigns around the world as Bitcoin's price and USD breaks all-time highs, or we're going to see a liquid supply continue to just relentlessly tick upwards. And what does that mean for the market? I guess we can't know that as of now, but super fascinated to watch that develop.
Yeah. So also to add to that a little, so I think. So illiquid supply, so it is growing, but if we get to the fourth halving, we will kind of have a better idea at the pace of which it's growing, because the HODL model is quite conservative now, and but if we get to the fourth halving, more or less, we can get probably a better sense of the direction and the pace of which this is growing, because obviously we're still very near the inflection point currently. So, things can still be invalidated, let's say, as well, or, maybe the HODL model is too conservative and, we should change it a bit to the upside as well. And I think by next halving, we will probably see better, at the growth rate of a liquid supply. And maybe we'll have to adjust the model a bit to the upside, or even, it's very difficult to adjust it to the downside. That would kind of mean that the model would be invalidated, and that maybe the inflection point is not yet at the third halving, but maybe at the fourth or the fifth halving. And we will have to see from there. But as we discussed above with some of the data that I think it's very unlikely that we'll make another low on a liquid supply, especially because we look at these trends. The HODL army seems to be continuously growing, and so I don't see a liquid supply coming down anytime soon.
Jump in and point out, kind of the significance of what you're saying about kind of like the halvings having a bigger impact moving forward than they have the past two, per se. I know there's been, like you said, and really articulated, like this idea of like, oh, the days are getting longer. Oh, the halving cycles are getting longer. The volatility is lessening. But that really conflicts with this idea of finite supply meeting this kind of exponential increase in demand, as well as what the adoption S-curve looks like. So this concept of kind of like a supply inflection curve or inflection point, and then kind of the reintroduction of extreme volatility in Bitcoin price, it seems to make sense from the perspective of adoption.
Yeah, so there is two forces here. So basically, on one hand, we have just the growth in market cap, and so that kind of is a force that maybe causes like diminishing returns, which we have seen in the previous halvings as well. But on the other hand, we have also the supply now, which is tightening again. So that's a force which put upwards price pressure. And you can see in this inverse S-curve that also, I mean, the reason that the S-curve on the right side of the inflection point is a lot less steep increases, is because it's basically a stretch out version of the first part of the S-curve well into the future. So we have this linear behavior in the second half, and that so we can I still think we cannot expect the same volatility as we've had in the first and the second halving, let's say, but we can expect kind of maybe 2017 kind of volatility towards the fourth and the fifth halving. Now, some other things. So based on the HODL model, we can look at the impact of the halvings, and they are diminishing. So they are still diminishing. So the fourth halving has less impact than the third halving, and the fifth halving has also less impact than the fourth halving. That will still be diminishing, and so it is likely, although with the strengthening available supply, that does cause the halving to have more effect than initially anticipated. So it's not like the effect of the halving, which is kind of, the halving has been halving, so also the effect of the halving must have been halving. That's not kind of the case, because we're growing in terms of illiquid supply. So a tightening available supply that causes again to have that fourth halving and fifth halving also will have more effect than we maybe might have anticipated, because now we take the supply into the calculation as well. And so I could expect kind of 2017 volatility towards the fourth and fifth halving. I think that would, and if we would see that volatility, then also that kind of confirms that this model, represents kind of a truth, So on the other hand, so in this model, I did not incorporate as much the diminishing. I mean, it's a little bit incorporated here because I tried to draw this inverse S-curve and to get like kind of a conservative good fit. So it has an R-square of 96, and so it has a good fit. But I still tried to be conservative as I could to draw this blue line, basically the model through price. So it does incorporate a little bit of diminishing returns there as well. And but yeah, the great difference here is indeed that from the inflection point, instead of like a curve that has a decreasing slope, it actually has an increasing slope, except that increasing slope is very mild, compared to in terms of it was decreasing a lot faster in the first part until the inflection point. Then now the increase is very mild, and so it gives more like a linear line after the inflection point. And so I think, it's a very interesting concept, because I think many people in the Bitcoin space especially are focused on that log growth curve and on diminishing returns in general. But yeah, as I gave with the analogy of lengthening days, and then you get to the summer and shortening days, I think it's worth to take into consideration as well available supply, which has obviously not been really taken into account with a log growth model. Now the good thing of a log growth model obviously is that it's more conservative than this model. So if it's broken to the upside, it's people will not be as mad. I'm sure if this model gets broken to the downside, people will get more frustrated. But I still think it's important to introduce this kind of perspective, in terms of like shortening days and lengthening days, to take again the analogy of the summer with lengthening days and then suddenly shortening days. And I think that's a perspective that has not yet been presented in the Bitcoin community. And I think it's a very interesting concept. So I also very much still look forward. I just want to say that this model, it's also a hypothesis. So it's I don't want to say this is the truth and we're going to million by having 5. But it's definitely interesting enough to follow this model as well and see what Bitcoin does, because it's a perspective that, as I said, it was not yet, nobody thought of this yet in the Bitcoin community, I think. So I don't know if there are any questions still, Dylan or Sam, you still have something to add to this?
Yeah, I would love to add one. I think it's great to emphasize that outlaying this as a hypothesis and a scenario, and a conservative one at that, and just trying to take a first good, sophisticated go at projecting out the impacts of the liquid supply forecasting growth. So I think that's important to remember that people looking at this. I know that we talked about some potentially bullish scenarios and previously before. So if you look at, maybe the liquid supply percentage curve on a more recent basis from maybe 2014 to 2016 on, you get a lot more of a U-shaped style curve. And in this scenario right now, you have a liquid supply percentage, reaching something like 80% by 2036. And then right now it's right around that 76% range. What would it look like if we get this shock to the upside, that we get this, if we look at, a smaller time frame, we say liquid supply is going to hit 80% and really grow a lot faster than 2036. What does the curve look like? How does that make you think about changing the model? Is it more parabolic? Can you talk through some of your thoughts there?
Yeah, so that's a very good question or comment there. So indeed, the HODL model is kind of the most conservative way I could get a good fit on the growth of illiquid supply. And there are models that there are fits or that actually make a lot more bullish growth on illiquid supply. And therefore, as I said, so if we get to around having the fourth halving, we can kind of better estimate the curve after the inflection point. So maybe we have to adjust the HODL model to the upside. Now, what does that for the price model? So that kind of means that if we have to adjust it to the upside, it would mean that the HODL model would approach 100% sooner. So 100% of the liquid supply will be approached sooner, or 100% of circulating supply basically would be approached sooner, and that would mean that the S curve would be, the S curve for the price model would also be growing a bit faster. So now, obviously, in the beginning of that S curve, it will still relatively remain flat because it starts from that lowest slope. So I think for the fourth and fifth halving, it would not be like a tremendous change to the upside, but it would maybe have still a significant impact to the upside for the fourth and the fifth halving. Now, it would make most impact. It would make after having 6 and 7, which then the S starts to go more parabolic, let's say, and so. But anyway, I think, and that's maybe something I haven't mentioned yet. So I think there will be another inflection point in the future where the growth of a liquid supply will again decrease. And in my opinion, the best way to look at that is maybe when we get to hyper Bitcoinization. So let's say we get a Bitcoin price eventually, in 8 or 10 years or something between 1 million and 10 million. That would mean that Bitcoin will absorb most of the value in the world, let's say, and so no new demand really can it can come in anymore as it has been over the last years, and so I think at that point in time we will probably get to like a second inflection point where the growth of that illiquid supply will again decrease, and because if we have hyper Bitcoinization, Bitcoin will still be used and there will be constant demand, but there's no millions that can keep on flowing in, because most of the value is already stored in Bitcoin. So it's very likely, in my opinion, that we will get a second inflection point into the future. But in my opinion, most likely that will be after prices around like 1 million or 10 million per Bitcoin, right? So there's still, and now you could ask the question, is there enough money to keep up the pace now? And I think if Bitcoin is truly going to do what's it going to do, then we have many still balance sheets of companies where money can flow into Bitcoin. We have the bond market where money can flow into Bitcoin. Bitcoin can eat, a part of the commodities. Bitcoin can eat up part of real estate. And so there's a lot of money in the world still that can flow into Bitcoin. So I think it's definitely possible if Bitcoin keeps on its current trajectory that we can see those prices in the future. And I to be honest, I think this model can be relatively representative on how fast it's going to go. And I think it's very interesting that for having the fourth halving, it only predicts a price of 100K, but then for the fifth halving, it's kind of a price of $1 million. So it's that those are kind of extreme estimates, maybe perhaps. But yeah, if you think what Bitcoin has done, sometimes we underestimate what it can do in 10 years. So we overestimate sometimes what it can do in 1 or 2 years, but we underestimate usually what it can do in 8 or 10 years. So with that sense, I think it's very reasonable to assume that Bitcoin will reach those prices of 100K within the fourth halving. And to be honest, so $1 million in the fifth halving, it kind of seems high to me as well, but I'm not going to bet against Bitcoin, and also this is what the model shows through the data, and I try to even keep it conservative, right? So it is the most conservative I kind of could do as well. So the model obviously can be wrong, and as I said, it's an hypothesis, and as I said, there are these two forces. So we have the force which is driving price up, which is available supply shrinking. But on the other hand, we have also this growing market cap, which kind of has this diminishing effect on price. And so the question is where do they meet each other, right? So that is very difficult. So and the problem with probably the lock growth curve is that it doesn't account for this upward price pressure, and maybe the problem with this S curve is that it maybe doesn't incorporate enough the diminishing effect of an increasing market cap on price. And although it does incorporate it a little, because we draw that blue, so the model line, we draw it with the best fit through the price behavior of the last 10 years, let's say, and so it does incorporate that a little bit. But maybe it's not representative enough, So that's all I wanted to say. Sam, do you maybe have any questions? Mm-hmm.
No, I was going to say we have about 3 minutes left, so I think that this is a good spot to kind of wrap it up. But to me, this perspective is incredibly interesting. And again, these models, they're supposed to help you kind of get a better understanding, not necessarily predict the future. So the stock to flow model, I think, was very useful for people to try to understand how that impacts Bitcoin's price and how that is of value to Bitcoin. And I think that this HODL model and these ideas of the inflection point where a liquid supply and the store of value use case really cement themselves, and then potentially even a future inflection point where medium of exchange and Bitcoin as global money assert themselves. It makes sense with how the evolution in thinking of Bitcoin adoption and hyper Bitcoinization has kind of been going through. So that's just my personal opinion that, these kind of concepts and this framework really make sense. But of course, we're going to have to see it all play out.
Exactly. Thank you so much, CK, for the spaces. And I don't know if there's still any last thoughts or so. Dylan, maybe you still have something to add, or otherwise we can wrap it up.
Yeah, I would just say, again, thanks for pushing it with us first with the deep dive. We're really excited to share that with our kind of user base. So they got to see that on Friday. And for anyone that hasn't kind of seen that full article, is it pinned in the nest? If not, Root, I believe it's your pinned tweet. That recent model. So nope, it's your other kind of awesome visual. For readers or for anyone that wants to check out the article, just make sure to top over to the deep dive. And has it been published on the magazine yet, or is that coming?
Yeah, no, it's available on Bitcoin Mag.
Perfect.
Okay, well, thank you so much, CK, for having this Bitcoin Magazine Spaces and YouTube live stream to discuss the model and to put this perspective out into the Bitcoin community. And I still hope to get lots of feedback, and we will have to see, maybe we might have to adjust the model maybe it will be good as it is. And so those are all interesting things, and I will keep everyone up to date. If you don't follow me yet on Twitter, make sure you do, and you get the updates on all these models.
Thanks again, Root. And yeah, Root is a must follow. Recently broke 100,000 and 1 million is coming up next. So amazing insights there, and really excited to kind of see the evolution in this thinking. So thanks for introducing it with Bitcoin Mag. And to everyone out there, go check out the deep dive. Go check out Bitcoin 2022. That is happening in 28 days, and you can meet a lot of us in person there. A lot of the Bitcoin community is going to be gathering in Miami, Florida for that. So that's going to be a ton of fun and, history in the making. So again, Root, thanks so much. To everyone out there, subscribe to the deep dive, go to the conference, and use promo code YTMAG to save 10% off. And until then, peace.
All right, we're live.
Bitcoiners, welcome back. I'm here with our producer, Chris, and our legend from the Breakup, Nolan. Y'all, before we get into the Breakup, I want to tell you about the Bitcoin conference. 28 days away from the biggest Bitcoin event ever. 30,000 Bitcoiners coming together, showing the world how real this thing is. Like Bitcoin 2021, that was 12,000 people. We've smashed that record. This conference is already going to be bigger, and we have our eyes set on 30,000, making this the biggest Bitcoin crypto event ever by a long shot. Not even close. Nothing is even close to that. And it's going to be 4 days of straight Bitcoining. The last day, the Sound Money Festival. We're throwing a music festival for Bitcoiners. So you're not going to want to miss this one. Invest in yourself. Come to the Bitcoin conference. You're never going to be able to have a networking experience like this. Whatever your project is, whatever you're bent in the Bitcoin space, there's going to be something there for you, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So excited to meet Nolan for the first time in person, excited to give Chris a hug, and excited to see a lot of the Bitcoiners out there in Miami. 28 days, ticket prices go up next week. Do not wait. Use promo code YTMAG, pay in Bitcoin, stack those discounts, and come to Miami Beach, Florida for Bitcoin 2022. All right, that's enough of me. What's up, Nolan? Welcome back.
Thanks. I love life. And even though it looks like a lot of Americans are worried about the immediate future, Rasmussen, a polling agency, did a poll yesterday on the number of Americans that believe we're on the verge of a 1930s-like depression. And it turns out 52% of Americans, 52%, say a 1930s style depression is in the works. Do I think that? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And we're going to go over why today. Because people who have been in Bitcoin for a long time look at hyperinflation and say, well, hyperinflation is kind of a drag, but hyper Bitcoinization is the answer. So we're going to
Did we lose Nolan?
I think we might have lost Nolan. Hold on, we'll see.
Man, that internet's not working with us today.
Yeah, the Barbados internet is not helping out here.
Chris, you excited for the conference?
I can't wait, dude. I can't believe it's 4 weeks away, 28 days. It's coming up hard and fast.
Exactly 4 weeks.
Exactly 4 weeks. Yeah, I mean, I'm really looking forward to the Barbados, or not the Barbados, to the Impervious browser. I'm looking forward to hanging out with our Barbados teammate here, Nolan, when he meets us in.
How long was I off for, guys?
You're off for like 30 seconds, but you're back now.
30 seconds.
Tell us about hyper Bitcoinization.
Was I at the hyper Bitcoinization part? I don't know what happened there. I think it's still that camera. It disagreed with the being unplugged before I got on. I had a camera that wasn't working. You know, you try to make the simplest setup for these types of things and it just never works. Cameras and all this, and guaranteed 100% of the time you're going to get some kind of a So I wanted to start just by contrasting. That's the point of the show. We contrast relationships that go into making dollars, fiat, and we contrast those with the relationships that go into making Bitcoin. That's why it's called the Breakup. It's about contrasting financial, commercial relationships. And I wanted to start the show today just by talking about this Outlook piece, this poll, which suggests that 52% of Americans, according to Rasmussen, believe that America is on the verge of a 1930s style depression. Personally, I don't think so, as I mentioned, because anyone who looks at the precipice of hyperinflation and who's been in Bitcoin for a while knows that the counterforce, hyper-Bitcoinization, exists. We're going to talk about it today, and we're going to contrast these hyperinflationary forces with hyper-Bitcoinization forces. To do so, first, we're going to talk about a subject we haven't really spent much time on this show. We, at the beginning of the Russia-Ukraine war, suggested it wasn't really going to go as simply as a lot of people said in terms of Russia. We talked about how Ukraine was arming itself with drones and they'd be firing back. And I'm not so sure about just jumping into a war against these two different countries. So when I first looked at that, I said, it's not going to be such a simple scenario as Russia walks in and just wins. And there's a fella out there named Kamil Galiv, who is a fellow, I can't pronounce the exact fellowship he has at the Wilson Center, which is a think tank, supposed to be a non-partisan think tank. Kamil Galiv has had a few Twitter threads since the conflict in Ukraine started that really are helpful. He had one describing the failure of the tanks, really the maintenance of Russian military infrastructure, weapons, tools, all that kind of stuff. And he said the tires, in fact, had worn out. They hadn't been driven, and that's why a lot of these tires were blowing themselves. He has a totally different one here, which brings a brand new definition to clown world. If we think in America we've got some clown world stuff going on, Putin does something that, I don't know, what's worse than clown world? Like retarded clown world? Is that the worst thing? And pardon me if anyone takes offense to the word. Sometimes in French, you can say it just means you're late, right? If you say retardé, you're just late. So when I say that, I mean, it's got to be worse than that. But here it is. It's a story about tractors. It's a story about tractors being built for the Russian farmland. And this Twitter thread underlines this amazing story. So it turns out a governor was appointed by Putin to this area, this industrial area, to perfect something called import substitution. So Russia didn't want to import everything anymore. So they hired this governor, and one of the goals within the umbrella of import substitution was building a tractor, like a farm tractor, a John Deere type of farm tractor. So it turns out that the CEO, so then the governor hires a CEO, and that's the CEO's job of this tech company, to build this tractor. And they built the tractor. It was amazing. The CEO gave a speech. He said, our governor can guide, can inspire, can command. Several of the main branches of production are organized by her direct orders. One of her last commands is to make our own tractor. It is a huge work of scientists, of technicians, of engineers. It's going to take years. And in the end, they delivered this tractor. It was called the Russian Tractor AHT4135, and was really a symbol. They advertised, they said, look what we've built our own tractor. They celebrated it. Only not so much. What did the scientists, technicians, and engineers build? They bought a kit from Czech Republic. In the end, it was really just a model built in Czech Republic that came in a box and they assembled it in Russia. So what Russia sold as homegrown tractors was really just them buying these kits and then assembling them in Russia and pretending that they were homegrown. And this is really the greatest example you can see out there of Russian vertical power, which is the sort of vertical integration of top-down economies we talk about a lot. That's what we contrast in the show, the sort of bottom-up nature of Bitcoin versus this top-down structure. This whole thing ended up becoming a scandal in Russia. The CEO was arrested, not fired. You can imagine in America, someone like this would get fired. No, arrested. And of course, the governor who appointed that person, who was all about getting rid of the imports, not a problem. This person not only didn't get in trouble, the governor was promoted. The governor who the CEO said was responsible for got promoted. And now her job is to check transparency of all branches of government to make sure that they use government funds efficiently. And here's how Camille breaks this down. He says, that's how social mobility works in Russia. Bullshitters are actively promoted, just pretend to work on import substitution, share stolen cash with influential people, and go up. Now you check financial transparency and prevent corruption. So it looks like Russia can't do anything. They're completely incompetent. And one of the reasons why the war might not be going at all according to Putin's plans. I don't want to delve into what's going on necessarily. I know we try and go around the Ukraine-Russia situation, but of course it's really hard to sift through what's going on there. This story looks legit. This story looks accurate. I'd say if I was guessing, the top-down vertical structure of Russia would produce a result like this. So this fits within my own personal worldview and is one of the reasons why I've chosen Bitcoin over this sort of nation state structure. And you can say, oh, it's Russia. Well, let's compare it to America now. So it turns out that America, we're seeing all kinds of news that America is calling up Saudi Arabia and UAE to get them to increase gas and oil production. But it turns out that Saudi Arabia and UAE won't even take a call. America and Biden can't even get a call. He can't even get a call. Why is that? Well, let's go back just a few weeks ago. There's a whole scandal today where everyone is pointing out on Twitter that Biden had stopped oil and gas leases already on the same day that Putin invaded Ukraine in late February. So if you're Saudi Arabia and the UAE and you're getting a call from this guy, but he probably could have solved it on his own with his own means just a few weeks earlier and decided, who cares? I'm not going to do it. I'm going to just do the opposite of that. We see that the country with the debt ceiling in about 3 days about to be capped again. There's a $1.5 trillion bill to keep the government funded. No one knows what's in it. No one knows what's going on. No one's read it. There's no hearings on it. I guess they're going to pass it. Who knows? So if you're saying that America couldn't be tractors, yeah, maybe. America could probably build a tractor. They're better than Russia in that way. But you don't think that they can waste as much money and have as many blind spots as Russia has? I think that's probably wishful thinking, if you know what I mean. Now, we can even see stories in our own news about how all of this stuff is just not even covered in a way that would be useful. There's sort of a trend of these stories that are treated by media organizations as completely crazy just a few weeks earlier, and then all of a sudden, whoops, they're real. We have one now. Now, this is a guy, Justin Ling, who I've met several times in Canada. He's a Canadian. And he writes in this magazine, Foreign Policy. And just last week wrote an article that Russia helped create and is now actively amplifying a conspiracy theory claiming that the invasion of Ukraine was done to destroy US run. I'm going to point out that what he says is different than the debunk in a second. US run bioweapons facilities. The wildest part, people believe it. And he linked it into QAnon and all these things. Well, it turns out just yesterday that Undersecretary of State Victoria Nuland admitted that Ukraine had bioweapons facilities and Americans were trying to protect them. Now, the difference between, so everyone's saying, oh, Justin Ling got it completely wrong again. He's completely off. I don't think he's completely off. I think his argument still is sort of true. US run bioweapons is totally not the same thing as Ukrainian weapons facilities. So I'm not saying there's one right or wrong here, but this is a fella who wrote in the same piece just a few months earlier that the lab leak theory out of Wuhan was a complete idiot's idea. It could never happen. He was saying that just a year ago. So this guy has a real habit of getting it completely wrong, the opposite of what happened. He did it with lab leak, looks like he's done it here again. He's done it a few more times, usually on some of these sanctions and Bitcoin stories as well. And another story with the New York Times, there's this, Project Veritas. I'm sure some of you heard it. They do these hidden camera things. It's a trick. It's entertainment. It's entertainment. Anyone who sees it as hard-hitting journalism, they get lots of insight, lots of what can be journalism, I think. But let's be honest, it's entertainment. We love watching it. Who knows who some of these people are they get sometimes? Who knows the types of honeypots they create in order to lure these people? But boy, is it fun watching the people spill their guts, all these guys bragging and just digging graves. They get a New York Times national security reporter saying that the stuff that happened in Washington, D.C. around that happened in January of that year, the coverage in the New York Times was way over the top. Now you compare that to what actually comes in the New York Times. And that you can actually look at the articles in this model as people writing for their bosses, right? It's like the corporate model. The New York Times had a story that fit the narrative, so the writers had to fill it. But here's just a writer, the national security reporter, talking off the record and saying, yeah, it's stupid, over the top. That's this reporter just speaking one-on-one. I think how a lot of people might have seen it. Not saying there's a right or wrong way for the moment. A lot of people would have seen it that way. So here's this reporter speaking one-on-one to a person and saying, over the top, a bit ridiculous. He said other stuff too that I haven't fact checked, and who knows, but about who was there, and maybe the FBI and other people have said that, and who knows, and what's going on with that, we don't know. But this guy said something off the record to a person that sounded reasonable, and at the same time is creating these grand narratives for their boss at a newspaper. And when you add that all up, you start to see Clown World and the corporate structures behind it not being able to produce anything that is going to get much traction going forward. They can't even make tractors, can't do it. We get the US government with all of these troubles, with a complete lack of accountability. And then yesterday, you turn on Joe Rogan and Mr. Beast is on. For those of you who don't know who Mr. Beast is, let me tell you. And this is something that even blew Joe Rogan's mind. He's one of the greatest YouTube creators, content creators in the world. He has a burger shop, all kinds of viral videos. He has over 200 million followers across platforms, which blew Joe Rogan's mind. And he described a bit of his processes and how he made it there. He said he started when he was 11. He would make videos every day. None of these videos really went anywhere. One of the first ones he ever put up actually went viral and gave him the appetite. So he always knew what he was striving for. He would spend mornings right into evening on Skype with his friends talking about what makes a video viral, how do you produce them, what's the pacing, what's the reveal, all that kind of stuff. And even just talking about the systems that he runs in order to grow these things, he showed one example that's just unbelievable, where he dubs all of his videos. He said, well, I've got these followers, I want to grow it. English is only about 10% of the world's population. What if I start dubbing my videos into other languages? And he said, okay, well, why don't we just even forget about dubbing it? What if we get like big, voice actor stars in each country to do that? People who would recognize their voice. He went to Japan and got a famous anime voice to do the Japanese videos, and goes all of these different countries and gets famous voices that people recognize and pays them and redoes the videos, dubs them in other languages. And you start to look at how he produces all of this stuff and you say, wow. And then he started telling personal stories about this stuff. So he has very little personal wealth, doesn't keep much of the money. He bought one house only because of security concerns, where his previous house that he had, which was just sort of a very basic bungalow, got robbed, including his Bitcoin, which was stolen from it, which he recovered later, apparently. But Bitcoin stolen from the place, and realized it just wasn't going to do. So he needed to actually spend a bit of money on a secure home. But other than that, no real material possessions, doesn't spend any of the income that he gets from any of these videos. He puts it all back into the content. And it made me think of the business models around royalties and content creators. And I wanted to bring it up just to contrast. You know, we got oil and gas in the news. We get Justin Ling writing for these publications. We get the New York Times story. And I want to sort of compare just how broken royalty contracts are in the normie world, and then show what Mr. Beast is doing, and show how oil and gas might even be the middle ground, because we hear a lot of oil and gas contracts today. So now watch these center points here. This is what I want you to focus on. It's these circles, right? So in the normal royalty contract that we have today, this is for almost all writers, publishers, musicians, all these guys. The creator creates the art and then actually sells the copyright here. You see, sells the copyright to the publisher. So the publisher now holds the copyright. The publisher does the marketing and production, gets sales, gets the money back. And then that publisher actually pays the creator royalties. Like there's some idiot who just was like, oh, you have an idea that I can invest in? Oh, great. They give them about 5K, 10K as an advance, and then they give them about 10 or 15% of sales in total. So if you compare that now to oil and gas, and I'll even bridge to explain a bit about what's going on with the American system right now with Joe Biden. So this works more like you want a royalty contract to operate. So the landowner here, who has the oil, the gas, and can exploit the land and get it out, takes investments from royalty contract owners. So they give them investments. They do the marketing and production, sell the oil at market, get the money, and then pay the royalties back. So it's the way you would imagine a royalty contract to work. It isn't actually like that in publishing. Not the New York Times, not Justin Ling's publisher, not any of these, Simon & Schuster, none of these books do it that way. They all do it this way, where the publisher basically is the rights holder, just like as if they're the oil company, as if they're the ones getting the stuff out of the ground, right? So this might have made sense in a bookshop world where placement on a bookshelf was a big deal and it was hard to find editors because you had to know who they were, but it looks like the internet has changed things. So, but the model still remains. The model still remains. Let's look at oil and gas here. This is how it works. It's royalty contract holder buys the royalty contract from the creator does the work, gets the money, pays for the investment, the way you'd imagine. And if you want to understand what's going on with the oil and gas leases right now that the Biden administration has put the brakes on, what happens here is the oil and gas guys within this royalty contract need to describe basically the cost of carbon, the cost that they have to pay for global warming. And they want them to pay that cost upfront in the royalties. So they actually can't get the calculations right in the modeling. That was the excuse of pausing these oil and gas leases. They want the climate models to be accurate and predictive of what won't be shared here, what will be taken out and given to government agencies, whoever else needs to monitor, control, and stabilize the CO2 emissions, and that's why they're trying to put in a predictive model. Now, my question is, do any of these predictive models take into account Mr. Beast? I don't think so. Do they take into account Bitcoin? Do they take into account what we talk about on this show a lot, Bitcoin powered nuclear reactors? Do they take into account all the types of things that can be invented, all the different economic models that are possible? I don't think so. So let's take a look again at, we've got normal publishing, we've got oil and gas. This is what they don't take into account. Mr. Beast has 200 million followers, doesn't really make much money himself, reinvests in the content. And the model that he is propagating here is followers investing time. They're the marketing. They help produce these things because it's a community effort, usually. The setup, the pace, all that stuff. And in the end, content, of course, is sold. But we've even seen Mr. Beast give Bitcoin away to individual viewers. He gave $100,000 worth of Bitcoin away to through Coinbase just a year ago. If Mr. Beast understands the potential of saving in Bitcoin and rewarding royalty followers in some form of streaming money, in some form of attention economy, you're going to have a whole new model open up overnight. That model itself is almost identical to what we could see happening with Bitcoin when it comes to nuclear energy, as we've mentioned, where you can actually start building systems that fund themselves You could, the Bitcoin mined from a nuclear reactor could fund the purchase of the nuclear reactor as well as infrastructure around it. You can start to see these really novel business models that totally upend the publisher model here and even improve on the normal oil and gas contract here. What Mr. Beast is doing for content creation, and we're not quite at the place here where Bitcoin, where followers are getting streamed money into their account, but the model exists where you can basically be first at something, and any kind of royalty token, for example, that would be issued to that follower would just be an indication of how much Bitcoin is owed to the follower. So if you own, 1% of the potential upside of a media project, in the end, it's paid out in Bitcoin. What you're given is just sort of an indicator of what is owed to you. And you can start seeing models like this proliferate all over. It's what's happening in some of this DeFi stuff, but it hasn't really found a home in Bitcoin yet. But you can imagine it's not long until you're able to do this stuff. And I'm not talking about launching coins for every infrastructure project and building new blockchains. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about an accounting system that lets you earn your first Bitcoin from being a fan of art, a project, anything, right? I'm not talking about secondary trading of NFTs here. I'm not talking about secondary trading of a coin attached to art. Not what I'm saying, right? I'm saying direct royalties streamed to you in Bitcoin based on when you got involved in a project and how early of a fan you are. And when you imagine that's possible, you start to say, well, this stuff could take over really quickly. And if things lag in oil production, in tractors, if you look at the types of problems Mr. Beast can solve in a minute, he can launch a hamburger chain in a minute. Now it's just a hamburger chain, but is a hamburger chain so different really than oil and gas exploration? Is it? I mean, you got to pay someone, you got to get some specialists, you got to get people, they got to come, they join a project, it lasts for a little while, it stops, who knows? But the coordinating ability, the ability that someone like Mr. Beast has to do hamburgers could be easily ported over into something like Gold Rush Alaska, where you get these guys going to get gold on there's all kinds of scenarios where new types of systems can come about because we're seeing this shaking of the box and rearrangement of content creators, content consumers, and people who just have good taste and believe something's going to take off and get a following. So, if you're wondering even, take the executive order, which looks like we win, right? Am I wrong? Does it look like the White House executive order was sort of a good thing, or at least could have been a lot worse? If one of these people in all of this studying, now I don't expect much of them, we're talking about how absolutely unbelievably idiotic most of these people are, but we heard this genuine idea that they would embrace these possibilities. If any one of these nuclear regulatory agencies starts to see that the economics of Bitcoin mining could be applied to small modular nuclear reactors for all kinds of greenhouse gas mitigation, we'll know they're on the right track. So, and then hyper Bitcoinization will be even sooner, even quicker, and even more pleasant than terrible, terrible, nasty hyperinflation, which nobody likes and is really boring. We don't want boring hyperinflation. Nothing to do, boring. Hyper Bitcoinization, fun.
Nolan, great. Always love your insights and segments. I guess I have a couple quick questions or points that I want to touch, if you don't mind hanging on a little bit longer. So I know a lot of people, I won't say a lot of people in the Bitcoin space, such as our very own Matt Odell of Bitcoin Magazine, the way that he funds his own personal podcast, Citadel Dispatch, he uses podcasting 2.0. And while many Bitcoiners like that and love that model, because he's actually, he takes no money from, or he's basically only funded by his viewers, which is kind of the new model. And I agree with your sentiment. If someone like a Mr. Beast switches it on, that's not to downplay what Matt Odell does. I think he's excellent with his content, but we can just see by sheer numbers, Mr. Beast has a much bigger outreach than Odell or even some of the biggest Bitcoiners in the podcast. in the
Yeah.
podcasting space, whether it's Rogan or him or whoever.
Yeah, and even to see Joe Rogan's reaction to the audience size, you understand what you're actually talking about, right? It blew Joe Rogan's mind. If you see how he did it, he couldn't believe it. And we're looking at someone who is 100% dedicated to the craft of persuasion through this mimetic viral messaging and all this stuff. And I guess that's what I'm saying, is that the ceiling on someone like Mr. Beast is so much greater and higher than the ceiling we see with Putin, where he's exposed the ceiling. They can't build tractors. They can't. It's not possible. Could Putin today, with all of his money, some people said before any of this stuff that he was the richest person in the world. Could he have ever made hamburgers as delicious as Mr. Beast's burgers at the scale that Mr. Beast did, that competed in the American market like that? He could have made a gourmet hamburger, maybe. I don't think he was ever creating a competitive hamburger business model in America, which is a very competitive industry, right? Let's be honest. If you think oil and gas around the world and arms is tough stuff, right? Come to the American hamburger industry. These guys are cutthroat.
Yeah, well, I think it just goes to show, I mean, Mr. Beast's brand, I mean, it is himself, but he has a much better brand just by being who he is. You know, obviously they always say, what's the old adage of don't talk about money, politics, or religion around the table, because that's only a way to get half the people to hate you. Obviously, Mr. Beast, I don't believe he's ever touched on political things. Obviously, I think he stays away from it. Obviously, he does spin-offs of shows like what was the one, not the Hunger Games, but the one Squid Games, correct.
I won't let it's never even. I lived in Korea. I'm very familiar. I spent a lot of time in that country, and that show would have hit too hard for me. It would have just, avoided it.
For sure. So, I mean, obviously, Mr. Beast kind of falls somewhere in the middle of, I would say, combining. So I know your graphics there, but obviously a lot of his revenue comes through YouTube. So even I know YouTube's model is not really a publisher thing because they don't really give you an advance. It's more like you create the content. They obviously own the servers. They push marketing, production, servers, all of that. And then in the back end, you kind of get rewarded for viewership, or they kick back some of the money based on how viral it goes.
So I was more breaking him out of even his distribution through YouTube model. I was going to the burger stories and so even just some of these pop-up video stories that he does, the way he integrates his audience and his followers, and the spontaneity of it, and the sheer deployment of people focused on one thing is more what I found compelling. I agree that the business model needs a lot of work because of YouTube. So this should only be taken as it's a mental framework. It is not accurate in terms of how he actually gets paid.
Yeah, and I guess removing censorship from the equation I'm not saying Mr. Beast advocates one way or the other for any good reason, but it's very interesting that I know YouTube and a lot of the social medias have such a vast amount of followers and content. I mean, the sheer number of videos or content that's being produced at a rapid rate. But, and I'm not saying that they would do this, but at what point let's just say they were to censor Mr. Beast. This is just, a wild conclusion. If they were to censor him, something would fill its void, but you would think a lot of his fans would be very pissed. It's kind of what we saw with Joe Rogan, that people would be, I think many people would leave Spotify if he said, screw it, I'm going somewhere else. So in trying to keep this gigantic house of cards afloat, they kind of, yes, the censorship works in the beginning, but do it too much and they lose their audience. You know what I mean? They're in a weird spot. And I don't know if you see where I'm going.
I mean, look at this. Look at, remember we talked about it was negotiating power. And we said, when we did the first story about Neil Young, Joe Rogan, and Spotify, we said the only losers are Spotify, because Joe Rogan is in a great position. And we saw even the next day after I did that, Rumble CEO or founder, whatever, said, we'll match the 100 million and you just come over. And you start to say, well, was $100 million for Joe Rogan even the right amount? No, and look at that. Right when you see that Mr. Beast and Joe Rogan are so focused on content creation, and it is difficult to scale that, their brand is themselves. At what point does Joe Rogan decide to just be this content producer, in a sense, where either of them can basically create clones, not of themselves entirely, but we've seen people who go like that comedian Schultz that used to go on a lot. He gets his own
Andrew
podcast.
Schultz. Yeah, Andy Schultz.
You know, all these guys sort of, we've seen it on what's his name, the Tim Dillon show, right? His co-hosts go on to host their own shows, and that's a heavy lift. I think in general, Joe Rogan can launch any artist, any writer, and so can Mr. Beast. With the sheer size of their audience, can launch any creator they feel like at any time. And one can imagine that if they do move to their own channels and that kind of stuff, that you'll see more of that.
Yeah, so I guess this gets to my last point. So obviously the power's kind of shifted over the last 20 years, I'd say, away from governments or whatever to these large tech corporations. And, you know, you could argue who's more powerful, Joe Biden or Mark Zuckerberg, Joe Biden or Susan Wojcik or Wozniak, I forget her name, but the head of YouTube. So, but now we're kind of seeing a breakdown part with Bitcoin that, you know, they're kind of losing very rapidly. You know, they ascended very quickly, but almost very rapidly they could lose it. Imagine Mr. Beast decides to just cut out YouTube in general, run his own servers and just say, give me Bitcoin or, you know, 5 sats, 10 sats, whatever you can afford for the viewership, or even put it behind a paywall. I mean, I don't like that model necessarily, but if it's 5 sats to view, and then for every hour you watch, it's another 100 sats, they could very easily build their own model. And then it becomes going from censorship, which they have the power to do, to all of a sudden needing to beg Mr. Beast, Joe Rogan, who X, Y, and Z to come back to their platform, whether they have to pay them more, or they have to promise and put contractually, they can't censor you for no matter what, you know, barring, you know, something egregious. But it's definitely, the balance of power is in a weird spot. I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, that's why it is so great what Citadel, the 2.0 podcast network, what Matt Odell is doing. And I think any one of these platforms that uses Bitcoin in order to distribute content, I think are definitely worth publishing on. We should make an effort to publish this show, for example, on BitChute and on Rumble and on all these platforms for sure. I look at Sticks and Hammers 666. His audience now on BitChute is almost as large as it is on YouTube, as well as with Rumble combined. And he suffered for a long time to get it to where it is, but I don't think he needs YouTube anymore. I mean, his largest audience is still there, but he's doing much more content on the side away from YouTube and on these platforms. So
yeah, Nolan, thank you so much for coming on. I don't know if you have anything else to add.
That's the show, guys.
All right. Thanks so much, everyone. As CK said earlier, we are 28 days away from the Bitcoin conference. Make sure to get your tickets at b.tc/conference. Make sure to use the code YTMAG. We're going to call that a wrap for the day. Thanks so much. Hopefully I'll see you in 4 weeks down in Miami Beach. I'm really looking forward to it. And we're going to bring you the biggest and best conference that there is.